Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Kalamazoo City Commission to order for Monday, April 1st, 2019. Clerk Moss, roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Present.
Commissioner Cunningham?
Here.
Commissioner Sykes?
Here.
Commissioner Urban?
Here.
Vice Mayor Knott?
Here.
Mayor Hopewell?
Present. For our opening ceremony this evening, we will have an invocation by Pastor Nathan Dannison of First Congregational Church. I ask that you stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, Pastor.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. In our faith tradition, we are in the middle of a season of fasting that we call Lent. We sometimes struggle to figure out what the Creator is asking us to give up or to take on. And I've been moved this week by a piece of prophecy written by Isaiah. This is poetry from the Hebrew Bible. These words are over 2,500 years old, but still important. This is the fast that I prefer. Loosen the bonds of injustice that bind your people. Undo the bands of the yoke and let the oppressed people go free, and break everything that binds them. Divide your bread with the hungry. Bring the homeless poor into your home. When you see them shivering, offer them your own clothes, the clothes of your household. If you do this, your light will break forth like the dawn. You will recover from everything that is making your people sick. Your righteousness will go before you, and God will protect you. Let us pray. Gracious God, always faithful in your love for us, remind us that you are our guide and our destination. Call forth in us spirits of compassion, peace, and temperance. Set before us a larger vision so that we might seek first the beloved community, so that our righteousness and our labor of justice might shine and shine as a city set upon a hill. This we ask in all of your holy and beautiful names. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We have two proclamations this evening. Commissioner Cunningham has one, and Commissioner Sykes I didn't mention, but I left one for you at your position. I'll head to the podium.
If we can have the representatives from the KCAN, Kalamazoo Child Abuse and Neglect, to step up to the podium. And before I read off this proclamation, I just want to say to Sarah Joshi, who is our Director of Kalamazoo Child Abuse and Neglect, thank you for the dedication, the championing in our community, the energy, the work that goes on behind the scenes, and often sometimes in these opportunities in front of the cameras in regards to Kalamazoo Child Abuse and Neglect Council, Prevention Council. It is close to my heart. I am a executive board member for KCAN, and one of the things that I'm honored to say about this organization is it is proactive in its work. Oftentimes we get into a lot of different missions and we are reactive, but we as an organization focus on the educational component before it even happens. We focus on the educational component of how to communicate better in these circumstances and how to heal beyond these circumstances. So I have the honor today to not only be an executive board member for the organization, but to also read a proclamation before our citizens, which states, the City of Kalamazoo, State of Michigan, United States of America, proclamation for Child Abuse and Prevention Month, April 2019, whereas child abuse is defined as a parent or caregiver, whether through action or failing to act, causes injury, death, emotional harm, or risk of serious harm to a child. There are many forms of child maltreatment, including neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, and emotional abuse. And whereas, on average, 16 new cases of child abuse and neglect are reported in Kalamazoo County every day. And whereas the Kalamazoo County Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Council works to educate our children on personal safety, parents on safe sleep practices, and professionals on recognizing and reporting signs of child abuse and neglect. And whereas the Kalamazoo County Child Abuse and Neglect Council specializes in multiple programs, including Kids Are Special, KCAN Family Help Book, and mandated reporter training. And whereas the Kalamazoo Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Council recognizes the need to be proactive in the prevention of child abuse along with continuously building relationships throughout the county of Kalamazoo. Now, therefore, on behalf of the 52nd City Commission, I, Eric Cunningham, on behalf of the Honorable Mayor Bobby J. Hopewell, Mayor of the City of Kalamazoo, do hereby declare April to be Child Abuse Prevention Month in Kalamazoo and encourage citizens, community agencies, faith groups, medical facilities, and businesses to increase participation in the efforts to support families, thereby preventing child abuse and strengthening the community in which we live.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Cunningham. We are, of course, at KCAN very honored to have your participation, and we'll be sorry when your tenure is up. Child abuse and neglect is a problem in Kalamazoo County affecting 1 out of every 10 children. KCAN helps to alleviate that through the programs that Commissioner Cunningham mentioned. It's a problem not only because children are suffering, but because victims of childhood experience worse behavioral and medical symptoms. They experience diminished outcomes in their lives, behaviorally, physically, educationally, economically, than do their non-abused peers. So if we can get ahead of this problem of child abuse and neglect, we'll have a much safer and more economically prosperous Kalamazoo County in the future.
Thank you, and Bobby J. Hopewell, I am coming off of this dais to get a picture with you, but
what Ms. Joshi didn't say is also, or what I want to say to her is happy birthday tomorrow, since actually, yeah, we share a birthday.
We do. I'm in the middle. Okay, I'm in the middle. Thank you. Happy birthday, dear.
Happy birthday to you. Commissioner Sykes.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Can I have the representatives from the YWCA for the Sexual Assault Awareness Month proclamation come to the podium? All right, so for the proclamation naming April 2019 Sexual Assault Awareness Month, whereas sexual assault refers to any sexual, physical, verbal, or visual act that forces a person to engage in sexual contact against their will or without their affirmative consent, and whereas, according to data from the 2017 Michigan Incident Crime Report, there were 540 reported sexual assault and/or rape offenses in Kalamazoo County, and whereas, as reported in the 2017 United States Census Bureau, Kalamazoo County's population totals 262,985 persons, with women comprising 51% of the total, and whereas, as reported by the Williams Institute study in 2016, 0.6% of the United States population is gender nonconforming, non-binary, and transgender, and based on the Kalamazoo County's population total, approximately 1,578 individuals in the Kalamazoo area are not represented in sexual assault statistics, and whereas every 92 seconds an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes that victim is a child. 1 out of every 3 women, 1 out of every 6 men, and 1 out of 2 transgender individuals have been the victim of sexual violence in his, her, their lifetime. And Whereas, based on the above information, it is estimated that 44,701 females, 21,477 males, and 789 transgender individuals who are victims and/or survivors of sexual assault reside in Kalamazoo County, and whereas in 2018, YWCA of Kalamazoo provided sexual assault nurse examinations for 112 adults, 41 teenagers, and 38 children. These numbers do not reflect the number of individuals in our community who require long-term therapy, counseling, advocacy, and safe shelter, nor do they reflect the number of individuals who did not feel safe to come forward for examination and/or reporting. And whereas, with leadership, dedication, and encouragement, there is compelling evidence that we can be successful in reducing sexual violence in Kalamazoo through prevention education, increased awareness, and holding perpetrators who commit acts of violence responsible for their actions. And whereas, YWCA of Kalamazoo strongly supports the efforts of national, state, and local partners, and of every person to actively engage in public and private efforts, including conversations about what sexual violence is, how to prevent it, how to help survivors and victims connect with services, and how every segment of our society can work together to better address sexual violence. Now, therefore, on behalf of the 52nd City Commission and Bobby J. Hopewell, Mayor of the City of Kalamazoo, I, Shannon Sykes-Nearing, do hereby proclaim April 2019 to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month in Kalamazoo and applaud the efforts of the many victim service providers, law enforcement, community partners, and supporters for their efforts in promoting sexual assault awareness.
Thank you, Shannon. On behalf of the YWCA Kalamazoo, I think we just want to have a thank you for your continued support in proclaiming April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We definitely believe that sexual assault is not an individual issue. It is also a community issue. And so with that, we thank you for that and to keep moving forward as a community. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now on item C. Commissioners, you have the agenda before you. Are there any changes? Mr. Attorney?
Commissioner Urban asked that the resolution under new business be broken into two separate resolutions. And I guess I'm asking for the feeling of the commission as to how they want to proceed. I have two draft resolutions to break that up if that's the desire.
Commissioner Urban, I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I made that request this afternoon, and so the notice seems to be a little short perhaps for you. But what I was planning to do initially, and I just talked to the city attorney about, is should I make breaking it up as an amendment to the original resolution, or because I was planning to do that, and it was just a matter of whether to do that or to offer as a substitute resolution. So in conversing with the attorney, we thought it might be just best to just have us consider them as separate resolutions, because each one has unique features that make it distinctive.
and I'd like to have those brought out, and so they can be evaluated on their own merits. And I hope that you'll respect my request on that.
Mr. Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't even seen this resolution, and I understand that it is the custom of the City Commission that when there's going to be an item on the agenda, that we are told that a week ahead of time so that we can look that over. Is not that the practice of the City Commission, Mr. Mayor? You told me that last week, it was.
Typically, yes.
So I don't appreciate a whole new resolution coming tonight without me even having been able to see it and putting that on the agenda. I reject the idea. You have the ability to vote down the resolution that's there and then propose another resolution for a coming meeting if you want to do that. But I reject that idea.
Well, may I respond? The resolution that was presented to us by email, that was prepared by the city attorney, was prepared at the behest of someone. And there was no chance for anyone else to weigh in on whether that's the best way to proceed. At least it should have gone through admin, and so there would be other people being considered about that. So if you're thinking of my action being high-handed, I'm asking you the same question.
I'd like to respond.
Commissioner?
Thank you. I made it very clear the last meeting that on the next meeting's agenda, I wanted to see a resolution calling for a cessation of the Historic Commission's procedure to try to declare this a historical district. I made that very clear. And as a city commissioner, I have the right and the responsibility to do that, Jack.
Well, so you've done that.
Yes.
So now we're at the point where I'm just asking as a matter of, I would say, clarity and an ability to move forward quickly with alternative plans. If your motion on either of these things is successful, we can do that. So I'd like to, with the permission of the rest of you, just raise the question of how we proceed on that. I think that's a fair thing to do. I hope it's my privilege to at least ask that. Thank you.
So, Commissioners, I just want to expedite us through this. You know, we can have a back and forth. Would you like this split or not? Just by consensus.
And to Commissioner Cooney's concern, the two resolutions both call for cessation of the process. It's just breaking them up into each historic district on its own
Handling them
merits.
separately. That's
Yeah,
what
I wouldn't know that because I haven't seen the resolution, and that's very, I think,
So-
crazy.
Yes, Commissioner. Go ahead.
So first, I just have a clarifying question, because I think what I heard you say, Commissioner Urban, is that you wanted to know how best to proceed, if we should just change the resolution on the agenda, or if we should keep the resolution that's there now, vote on that, and then after the fact, if that doesn't pass, bring this sort of split resolution. I think that's what I heard you ask. I guess if that is what you asked, then maybe a good way to make this work with both of your perspectives, if you will, is to go ahead, vote on the resolution as it stands. If that does not pass, then I personally would invite you to lift up, your resolutions, and then we can take a stab on that and maybe decide as a group if we want to move that forward tonight or at the next meeting. It's my personal advice.
So again, I'm just going to ask the Commission again if there's consensus for the separation.
What-
As in
Explain.
consensus for what Jack has asked for. Pretty much I've heard no one respond yes to that. So
Could I
if
just ask what
Go
you're
ahead.
saying? There would be a vote on the resolution that we already have?
the agenda would stand as it is, the packet
Okay,
would stand
and then
as
if
it
that
is.
fails, then another resolution could be introduced?
Yeah. Understanding that someone could offer an edit to the resolution that's on, no matter,
Yeah.
as
Okay.
customary, which
Okay.
I may offer one, just to let you know. So,
If
here, Commissioner.
it's really unfortunate you didn't get to see this resolution beforehand, And I think if I were you, I'd be a little annoyed as well. And it doesn't do any good, perhaps at this point, for me to say that the text of the "be it resolved" part, is the same in both cases. The only differences that I'm aware of are the differences in the names. So we can proceed, but I do think we may be passing up a chance to be more expeditious about what the final resolution may be. And so I'll let it rest at that point and leave it to the rest of you to declare your wishes.
Okay. Anyone in the audience wanting to comment on an item under F, the consent agenda? That item will need to be moved to the regular agenda. If you have such an item, please indicate at this time. Seeing none, Communications Manager Moore.
We have none, Mayor.
Thank you. Consent agenda, please.
We have the following consent agenda items before you this evening. Approval of a one-year contract with Republic Services for the transportation and disposal of plant screenings from the Kalamazoo Water Reclamation Plant in the amount of $105,300. Item number 2, approval of a contract with JV Contracting for pavement line striping and specialty pavement marking in the amount of $157,274.80. Item number 3 is the approval of a contract with Earthworks Lawn and Landscape for the Mountain Home and Riverside Cemetery mowing and maintenance in the amount of $399,900, and also approval of a budget adjustment in the amount of $107,292. Item number 4 is approval of the purchase of 4 new John Deere 310 SL HL backhoes with bucket, hydraulic breakers, and compactors from AIS Construction Equipment in the amount of $521,441.80. Item number 5 is approval of a contract with Whiteman and Associates, Inc. for professional engineering services related to the Oakland Drive improvements, Parkview Avenue to Howard Street in the amount of $178,750. Item number 6 is approval of a one-year contract for the purchase of fluorosilicic acid from PBS Knollwood Chemicals, Inc. in the amount of $106,500. Item number 7 is the first reading of an ordinance to rezone 604 North Drake Road from Zone RS5 to Zone CC and schedule a public hearing for April 15, 2019. Item number 8 is the approval of amendments to the fiscal year 2018 budgeted appropriations to increase the general fund revenues by $1.1 million and increase the general fund expenses by $2,430,000. Item 9 is the authorization for the city manager to execute bilateral permit with the Zayo Group LLC pursuant to the Metropolitan Extension Telecommunications Right-of-Way Oversight Act. Item number 10 is the approval of mayor's reappointments to the following boards and commissions. The reappointment of Dean Berge to the Retirement and Perpetual Care Investment Committee for a term expiring on March 31st, 2022. The reappointment of Sandy Doctor to the Retirement and Perpetual Care Investment Committees for a term expiring on March 31st, 2022. And the approval of Jan Vanderclay to the Retirement and Perpetual Care Investment Committees for a term expiring on March 31st, 2022. Item 11 is the approval of the minutes from the City Commission meetings on March 18, 2019. Item 12 is the authorization for the city manager to execute all necessary documents for the city to acquire Lot 3 of Sun Valley Acres to address local flooding conditions. The recommendation is to hold until April 15, 2019.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Commissioners' requested action is a motion to approve items 1 through 11 and hold item 12 until April 15, 2019, and authorize the city manager to sign all documents on behalf of the city. Is there a motion? So moved. Moved by Commissioner Anderson,
Support.
supported by Commissioner Urban. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham?
Yes.
Commissioner Sykes?
Yes.
Commissioner Urban?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Knott?
Yes, but I'm abstaining on number 7.
Mayor Hopewell?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioners. Motion carried. G1, Madam Mayor.
G1 on the regular agenda is the adoption of proposed amendments to Chapter 21 of the Kalamazoo City Code and of ordinances regarding the decriminalization of certain violations and charges to sections regarding abandoned residential structures and nuisances, including graffiti. The action is to adopt the ordinance.
Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioners, you initially considered this last August, as a matter of fact, and in response to some concerns that were raised by city commissioners, it hasn't reappeared on your agenda. I think some of those concerns have been addressed. There's been no real changes. It's just a question of information that's been provided. There may be some who say, well, why did you wait until August? Isn't that kind of a long time between meetings? Under the city charter, there has to be at least a break of 1 to 2 week period between meetings, but there's nothing that says you can't have an August to April break as long as you're in the same session. Since there has been no interceding election changing the session of the city commission, you can continue to act on this ordinance. It's much like the state legislature does. They have a 2-year session. So there were bills passed at the end of 2018 that were introduced in early 2017. So in regard, this is the continuing effort in regard to the ordinance to decriminalize much of the city ordinance. This has to do with nuisance type of situations. And so I think you understand the ordinance, and if there's specific questions, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Anyone in the audience wanting to comment on this item, please step forward. You'll have 4 minutes. Give us your name and whether you live within the city. Good evening.
Jeff Messer, city resident. The fact that the city attorney's office has brought this item forward for final consideration tonight, I think is a violation of the spirit of the city charter. The city charter, as you mentioned, does require that you cannot introduce legislation in the same meeting and pass it in the final meeting. And as you said, the first reading for this item was back in August or September. That's back when the last attempt to decriminalize city ordinance resulted in a few hundred people in Bronson Park. So if you respect the voters, normally what would have happened is this item would have been brought up for a first reading at the second meeting of March, the previous meeting. And I consider that to be like a public notice. Manager Moore did 2 first readings tonight. She did a first reading for the Chick-fil-A, and she did a first reading for item 12. I'm not really sure exactly what that was. I didn't get to read it. But there's been a 7 months since the last time the citizens heard about this. And these items, it's like a public notice. You have a first reading, and then the next meeting, 2 weeks later, you have it up for final consideration. That gives the citizens some time to study the proposed changes. The citizens have not been given, the citizens have known about this, maybe the ones who follow the agendas, maybe since Wednesday, to think about this, not even a week. I mean, how many people live in the city now who didn't even live here 7 months ago? I don't know, 1,000 people. So if you respect the voters and the spirit of the city charter, I'm asking that you please consider tonight to be the first reading for these changes and bring them up at the next meeting. I mean, it's already waited 7 months. Bring it up at the next meeting, and then tonight will be the first reading, and then the next one, final consideration. If you don't do that, I want you to know that I am opposed to the entire effort to decriminalize city ordinances. I don't think it's a benefit to the citizens. I think it's primarily to benefit the city attorney's office and to reduce the workload. When City Attorney Robinson brought this up a few years ago, and you passed a resolution or ordinance to enable the effort to decriminalize city ordinances, he's brought up when he was the city attorney in Battle Creek, that their motivation for decriminalizing the ordinances was because of someone requested a jury trial in a barking dog case. So he's already admitted on the record that it's really about reducing the workload of the city attorney's office. The alleged benefit to the citizens is to help people get jobs, fewer criminal convictions, help people get jobs. But it comes at the cost of the lower burden of proof. Currently, someone gets charged with one of these misdemeanor offenses, the city or city staff, city attorney's office has to prove someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest possible standard, just like if someone committed murder. The city attorney's office wants you to lower that to the preponderance of the evidence, which is 50% plus a fraction. You have to provide an affirmative defense in a civil infraction case. Basically, if you're before the judge or magistrate, and you don't even automatically get a hearing, the assumption is you just pay the city the $100 or $200, up to $200, you don't even get a hearing. You have to provide an affirmative defense, and if you can't really defend yourself well, because you don't get to have a lawyer at the informal hearing, the judge or magistrate is going to tend to side with the city, and so it's really about reducing the workload and the city's burden of proof. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wanting to comment on this item? Seeing no one, Commissioners, the requested action is a motion to adopt the ordinance. Is there a motion?
I will make a motion for discussion purposes, I guess, so move.
Moved by Commissioner Anderson.
Support.
Support by Commissioner Cunningham. Commissioner Anderson.
So relative to those comments, I think it's certainly a reasonable statement that this long of a wait between the first reading and passing it does create a situation where, for many people, it can't seem like this is the first time. So I'm kind of sympathetic to that notion. Anyway, I don't know if there's something we want to do about that tonight, but that's a question, I guess, that I have. And then furthermore, I just wanted to say that this process was kind of commission initiated relative to trying to reduce criminal convictions for people's records. And the city attorney didn't start this work just on his own volition. We asked the city attorney some years ago, the commission did, granted probably a different group to some extent at the time, but we asked the city attorney to do this work.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm going to dive in for a second because I don't usually do this. The motion could have been to hold it for first reading and then bring it back. So if that was a wish, the motioner could have done that. So,
got it. Okay.
One, we don't have to follow exactly the motion that was presented. Okay. Two, and I just got to dive into this, the assertion that the city attorney did this to lower his workload, that is false. We talked about this for a long time. He did what we asked him to do, as he often does. In doing that work, he did say it will lower the workload. Absolutely, that was said. But the motivation, not one of us had a conversation with our city attorney, hey, let's lower the workload. We had a conversation about how do we decrease the harm that this may have on residents of our community. So I just want to make the facts known of what we did compared to what someone thinks he did. I wanted to be clear on that. Commissioner Erb?
Thank you, Mayor Hopewell. Well, I'll suggest then that the reading for this ordinance be considered the first reading, and we take it up again 2 weeks from now. I think that's satisfies, removes a bit of a cloud, and we can proceed pretty much with a little bit more sure-footedness. So I offer that.
Is that a motion, Commissioner?
Yes, it is.
Is there support for?
Support.
Support by Commissioner Sykes. Discussion around the motion regarding holding this being first reading.
Just a quick question. So there was a motion made and supported, and then
This takes precedent over that motion. This is offered as a substitute motion, if I'm not mistaken. We've done this like umpteen times up here, so I can't believe.
The proper motion is to postpone to a certain time, so you'd postpone action on the motion until the 15th. That's the proper motion, because there already has technically been a first reading.
Yeah.
You're just postponing
That's fine.
consideration until next meeting.
Yeah, that way it's as if this is the first reading for people who have short memories and short lifetimes in Kalamazoo.
Was there support for that motion? Or the supporters is still in support of that? Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Cunningham, we're talking about this motion. Commissioner.
I have a couple, well, one is a couple statements and then a question to Clyde. To be clear, 2 years ago in 2015, I had the honor to be a part of the body that put Attorney Robinson on this path to decriminalize some of our ordinances. So I am a huge champion in that space, one, to let that be known. Two, Attorney Robinson, this is a question specific for you. With the passing of this proposed amendment, would that change the standard and burden of proof?
Well, yes. I mean, a criminal offense has to, as the speaker indicated, has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If it's a civil infraction, the burden on the prosecution is by a preponderance of the evidence.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. And so still, in nature, a civil infraction on your record is deemed significantly different than that of a misdemeanor. I think we've had, for me personally, I've had plenty of time to review this information in this proposed amendment, and I will be in support of it moving forward tonight if possible.
Yeah, I'll just weigh in here. I want to be really clear. I want to appreciate the citizen who stepped up to the podium to share his feelings about this coming back before us so far in advance. If I'm being really honest, it's not something I would have thought about, and I consider myself to be a champion for transparency in government. And so I always really appreciate when our citizens come in and say, hey, hold up, you're not holding true to those values, and I'm really glad that you did so. And so I am in complete support of putting this off until the next meeting and considering this. I know we've already had our first reading, but understanding that this can be a first reading for some folks. And I also would like to echo my colleague, Commissioner Cunningham, and I'll just add in support of decriminalizing ordinances overall as a member of a community, the Black community that struggles quite a bit and has historically for decades with the criminal justice system and the sorts of barriers that criminal records create to people living to their fullest potential in our community. I'm fully supportive of decriminalizing these ordinances, but I know that we need to do so in the most transparent manner. So those are my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman.
I echo the concerns expressed by the commissioners, and let me point out, yes, there is a lower standard of proof, but it's not uncommon for my office to receive 2 or 3 requests in a year for people to get expungement of records for criminal convictions that they had ordinance convictions going back years. Under the Michigan law, you can't have any more than 3 misdemeanor convictions. If you have 3 or more, you're not eligible for expungement. And I've seen records where people have one criminal offense, ordinance criminal offense, that they've asked to be expunged, but they also have several civil infractions. Civil infractions don't count against them. If those were misdemeanors, they could not receive expungement. So, and is the direction you've set for the city that I attempt to carry out, and when people come to my office seeking an expungement, but I can't change state law. If they have 3 criminal convictions, they're not eligible. And so civil infractions permit this expungement to occur when they only have 2 misdemeanors. And in regard to, again, the speaker's concern, yes, while I don't know that it necessarily reduces the work of my office. The way a civil infraction works is if you, just like a traffic ticket or a parking ticket, if you want to go in and pay it, you can. But if you want to contest it, you have that right. And you have 2 abilities to do it. You can either request an informal hearing where, again, you don't appear with an attorney and you appear before a magistrate, and oftentimes the individual who issued the ticket, be a police officer or public safety officer or an inspection officer, comes in and you both tell your side of it to the magistrate. If you can, and if you don't like the result, you can appeal it to a formal hearing where you will be before a judge and you can bring in an attorney. Or you can skip the informal step altogether and go immediately into district court for a formal hearing. Again, you can bring an attorney with you, and my office would then appear at that hearing on behalf of the city. So there are opportunities to be heard. There's a whole lot of due process available to individuals who get a citation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm 100% supportive of moving this to the 18th. I mean, my concern was making 15th. Sure the 15th. My concern was making sure that we understood how this happened. It's important that we know that. And just for also transparency's sake, I'm the one that asked the city attorney to put this on the agenda again because I was wondering where this was, whether we had 2 meetings or not. I didn't specify that, but let's get it back on the agenda to keep us moving on the work that we said we would do regarding decriminalization of acts in this community that should not be causing the harm that it causes. Clerk Moss, roll call, please.
Commissioner Cunningham?
No.
Commissioner Sykes?
Yes.
Commissioner Urban?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Knott?
Yes.
Mayor Hopewell?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. Motion carried. This will be back on the 15th. Madam Manager, you have a report this evening?
No report this evening, Mayor.
Madam Clerk, do you have a report this evening?
Yes, Mayor. Included in the agenda packet under the City Clerk's report is a request for City Commission action submitted by Nathan Dennison. The request relates to the proposed Bronson Park and Nazareth local historic districts.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney, you have a report this evening?
No, Your Honor.
We are now on item J, policy items. Item J is an approval of an amendment to the City Commission Policy 45.1, addressing Freedom of Information Act procedures and guidelines to incorporate recent changes to state law. Mr. Attorney?
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a housekeeping item due to changes that were made in the Freedom of Information Act at the end of the last legislative session. And in essence, this is changes that to inure to the benefit of public bodies like the city. There was a Freedom of Information request made just about the time, well, first let me back up. After the 2016 election, clerks across the state had the obligation to hold the ballots for a period of 22 months. So that would have meant around September of last year is that they could have destroyed those ballots. There's no need for them to hang on to them any longer. Just before that deadline was going to be reached, there was a Freedom of Information request sent out to nearly every clerk, local clerk, city, township, village in the state of Michigan from a person named Emily out of New York State, asking that those ballots be preserved and asking for copies of all of the ballots without much other information. Under the Michigan Freedom of Information Act, there was a duty not to destroy them, so we were going to run over the national deadline that we were supposed to meet to destroy those ballots, and it was because of their unique size, it was going to take, we just can't give those ballots away, so they'd have to be copied, which would have been a large expense. So many clerks, and I believe our clerk's office did as well, sent a deposit request that we estimated how much it would cost to reproduce the ballots that were cast in our city, and then sent that on to Emily saying you've got to pay 50% of that deposit money before we get started on this reproduction. I believe some communities receive some money, but I don't think the city of Kalamazoo did. And if you don't receive any money, what do you do with that request? Does it die? And again, so the law in the Michigan was unclear as to what clerks had to do in terms of how long did you have to hang on to those ballots when there was no response to the deposit request letter. So there was a hue and cry. The legislature heard clerks, and so they did a couple of things. They said if you're going to file a Freedom of Information Act request, you got to give your complete name. If you're filing on behalf of an organization, you got to give the complete name of the organization you're filing on behalf of. And oh, by the way, once you get that letter asking for deposit money, you've got to pay it within 48 days, or it can be deemed abandoned, and the city or the public body has no further requirement to respond to that request. So given that circumstance and the changes in the law, we have to amend our policies and procedures that are required under the Freedom of Information Act to be published to reflect those legislative changes. So that's a long story as to why you're seeing this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Anyone in the audience wanting to comment on J1, please step to the podium. You'll have 4 minutes. Give us your name and whether you live within the city. Seeing no one, Commissioners, the requested action is a motion to approve the policy amendments. Is there a motion? Moved by Vice Mayor Knott.
Support.
Supported by Commissioner Sykes. Discussion? Roll call.
Commissioner Sykes?
Yes.
Commissioner Urban?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Knott?
Yes.
Mayor Hopewell?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. Motion carried. K1, consideration of a resolution addressing the proposed creation of 2 new local historic districts. Mr. Attorney?
Thank you, Mayor. This is the resolution that was requested by basically Commissioner Cooney and Vice Mayor Knott from 2 weeks ago. Basically, it would halt the process for creating 2 proposed historic districts in the city. The reason for the ability to do this is because under Michigan law, ultimately, whether a historic district is created is the call for the City Commission. And you are in charge of that process. And you have direction over the subordinate board, the Historic Preservation Commission, who you have assigned as a standing committee to serve as the Historic Study Committee. Under Michigan's Local Historic District Act, normally it provides that a study committee is appointed every time you want to consider an historic district. But you're not required to do that. In Kalamazoo, you've said we're going to create this committee, and they are a standing group, and they can consider creating an historic district and then suggesting or recommending that action to the City Commission. What the resolution does is, given the concerns that have been expressed in regard to the creation of the Nazareth College Campus District and the Bronson Park District, is that you're directing the Historic Preservation Committee to not continue the process. At this point, they have issued a preliminary study report on both proposed districts, and their obligation is to submit that preliminary study to the City Planning Commission and to 3 state-level bodies. Unfortunately, when I say unfortunately, if you look at the legislation, they identify 3 separate bodies as the Department of History, Arts, and Libraries, which no longer exists, but we would send it to a successor agency. The Michigan Historical Commission, which I don't think either exists any longer, but again, its successor body, and the State Historic Preservation Review Board, which I now believe is known as SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Office, and so it would go to that body. And so what you're asking is that preliminary report not be transmitted to those 4 separate bodies, and that basically the process would come to an end.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Commissioner Cooney, since you asked for this to be on the agenda, I want you to have a moment similar to if you were, if we were changing the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, certainly. Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would wait to hear, I would move this resolution, and I would want to hear from the people before I make my comments.
Don't do the motion yet, though.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you, since you asked for it, that you had an opportunity to comment early. With that, anyone in the audience wanting to comment on this item, please step to the podium. You'll have 4 minutes. Give us your name and whether you live within the city. Be advised, I am going to be very particular on the time. When the clock stops, I'm going to stop you. We have a lot of individuals that may want to speak on this, and I ask that you not hesitate. If you want to speak, please be prepared to speak when the line gets to a point that you're ready. Please. Thank you. Sir. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Joshua Koenig, chairperson of the Kalamazoo Historic Preservation Commission. According to Chapter 16 of the City of Kalamazoo Code of Ordinance, first established in 1973, quote, historic preservation is a public purpose, unquote. With each new historic district, the City Commission has reaffirmed that statement. In 1976 for the Stewart neighborhood, a few months before the 1980 tornado for the downtown Haymarket district, in 1990, the Vine neighborhood, and again in 1997 with the additions of the merging of the South Street and Vine historic districts. In 2007, the West Main Hill Historic District was added, and the last in 2010 for the Haymarket extension that allowed the Metropolitan Center project to move forward. Before that, the 100 block of East Michigan was described as a drain on Kalamazoo's downtown, deemed ready for demolition. It took time to find the right investor or project, but today those 4 buildings are filled with tenants, and the last storefront will soon become a grocery store for downtown residents, all because of the city's preservation efforts. Halting or recommending a halt to the current historic district process abruptly by resolution tonight flies against the actions of 7 previous city commissions. None of them chose to stop the committee process or the study committee process before it had truly begun, a process not established by the Historic Preservation Commission or by the City of Kalamazoo, but a process established under the state's enabling legislation under the provisions of the federal 1966 Historic Preservation Act. The Historic Preservation Commission, since being appointed by the City Commission in 2007 as the study committee, is concerned about the 2 threatened churches. It would be so easy to lose the character of the wall of historic buildings surrounding Bronson Park. As downtown Kalamazoo continues to prosper, as more parking lots are turned into new buildings filled with tenants and businesses, if this area was a historic district, these buildings would continue to protect the heart of our city. The historic district can preserve this collection, or excuse me, a historic district can preserve this collection of buildings far into the future, well beyond the lifetime of the current owners and occupants and members of the City Commission. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Sable. I am a city resident of Kalamazoo, and I am in favor of the creation of a Bronson Park and Nazareth historic districts. The reason why the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph are in Kalamazoo is due to the invitation extended to them by Monsignor Francis O'Brien in 1889 to help start a hospital in Kalamazoo, the request of which had gone unheeded by the city alderman at the time. By the generous donation of Bishop Borges in the sum of $5,000, which would be over $1.4 million in today's dollars, the hospital got its start. In the intervening years, Monsignor O'Brien, who would eventually become and creating the Michigan Historic Commission and become president in June of 1915, he acquired the Old Humphrey Farm property just northeast of the city of Gull, just northeast of the city on Gull Road. For the price of $1 and other valuable considerations, Monsignor O'Brien in the Office of the Register of Deeds filed a quitclaim deed on Tuesday, February 23, 1897 to Nazareth Academy. When the cornerstone of the building was laid in April of that year, among the documents were newspapers of Kalamazoo, a history of the community, a list of sisters that were present at the time, and a list of benefactors. The 600-pound bell was a gift of Father Lockbeer. Barber Hall, which has now been razed, was erected in memory of Betsy Morton Barber by the Honorable L.L. Barber in 1903. Nazareth Academy, St. Anthony's School for the Feeble-Minded, Gibbons Hall for young men, Lefevre Institute High School for girls, the St. Agnes Foundling Home, the Holy Family Chapel, the Mother House itself. None of these would exist. None of these endeavors could have ever existed without the generosity of others. The Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, they are merely caretakers. They are custodians. They have been entrusted by their patrons, donors, and benefactors to be stewards of the original mission that was set out in motion by Monsignor O'Brien himself. Monsignor O'Brien, who again started the Michigan Historical Commission. The property in which these sisters are currently residing was given to them for $1 by a man who's created the Michigan Historical Commission. I don't think that man today would appreciate anything that is going on in terms of trying to stop the creation of the historic district at Nazareth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Nelson Nave. I live in the city of Kalamazoo. The Kalamazoo Historic Preservation Commission is charged with identifying areas in the city that would benefit from protection under the local historic district status. There's a step-by-step process in developing a historic district study, which concludes with the City Commission voting on whether or not to establish the proposed district. The Preservation Commission has followed the state and local guidelines to a T and has done nothing wrong. Identifying potential historic districts in a community is a community planning tool, and as such is a good portion of the work happens out of the public eye. When road projects are planned, the affected property owners are notified after the planning is complete. When the required public hearings are scheduled, on a smaller scale, the city assessor's office looks at properties without the owner's knowledge to determine their taxable value. We can always appeal the tax bill, but the process of assessing the property is already finished. If a property owner could stop the assessor mid-assessment, the city would soon be bankrupt. The tedious work of preparing the historic district report is finished, and now it must be sent to the SHPO or state preservation offices for comment. After that, it comes to the Kalamazoo Planning Commission, and from there it goes to the City Commission, you all, for public hearings and final vote. This process has been used for every historic district in the city, the ones we have and the ones that were voted down. To drop this process halfway through sets a precedent that could affect every citizen advisory board or commission in the city, allowing a single property owner to crash any plans that are in process. Let the study proceed as outlined in the charter and bring it to a vote. May I repeat, this is an approved commission serving for the benefit of the city, and this latest action resolution is definitely interfering with the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Patricia Hirsch. I live at 610 West South Street. 35 years ago, I sat up there on the Planning Commission for 2 terms, and I worked for the city of Kalamazoo after that for almost 2 years. So I kind of got to feel and understand what you're doing up there. But I've been very troubled at the last 2 meetings, and I've got to say something about it because I think there's things going on that are just plain wrong. And one is that when speakers finished last week, one speaker spoke of their Dutch heritage, and when they finished speaking, they were ridiculed by one of the commissioners for being of Dutch heritage, and oh, that horrible Dutch heritage. That's wrong. I was here with a large group of people for the historic Nellie Fountain. We got up, we spoke, and a commissioner said, oh, this is one of those old, white, educated issues that we don't want to deal with. Then also said, oh, I got up this morning and all I wanted to do was tear down a white man's monument. How are we going to be peaceful in this city? How are we going to get along if this goes on in this commission? Now, second, I'd like to know why, if that same commissioner was arrested in the park over here for trying to help the public or the poor homeless people in the park last year that were living in tents, yet when the commission met 2 weeks ago, it was the $80,000 that the nuns were paying to maintain a building every month, to heat and to keep for whatever purpose, maybe to tear down. Yet we have a whole group of people that have lived all winter in tents. Maybe the city should be thinking about, to the sisters, do you want to sell that building? That could give 90 people a home. It's going to cost $1 million. Yes, $1 million or more to tear that building down. Where's that money going to come from? $80,000 sounds pretty insignificant. Maybe it could be sold and it could be used for a purpose that would fit the public need, the homeless. Also, while I was here last week, one of the commissioners said that she wanted to speak about the property, but she was the church, but she was a member of the church. And I would like to say that if you're going to vote and a member of the church is intending to vote and to not abstain, they have to ask themselves, would I feel guilty if I vote against my church and what the church is doing? If I feel guilty about the church or that vote, Robert's Rules has some very strong things to say about that. So I think anybody that's a member or has a connection to that church or any of the churches that are involved has to think twice before they vote, because you're talking about a very small time in the public realm of things. Our lifetimes are this little tiny time in Kalamazoo's history, but we want to destroy Kalamazoo's history because this little tiny group of people at this time feels they can't do this. And I think it's your responsibility to act for the public and not for a small group of people. I do not judge how they are fine or not fine people. I simply say we can't judge for a small group of people when we have a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Roger Parzik. I live in the West Main Historic District, and I own a building in the Haymarket Historic District. And I just wanted to share, before I get started here, a little picture that a friend of mine gave me that shows in 1968, Norm Carver took this picture of Bobby Kennedy standing in front of all places, the first Reformed church in Kalamazoo. So although we maybe, have lost Bobby Kennedy, we can still point to that church and say, this is where that happened, and we may in the near future not have that opportunity. But it's a very nice picture of Bobby Kennedy standing over here in 1968, March of 1968, 51 years ago. So I have to tell you just how disappointed I am that this commission is even considering the proposals before you tonight. What does it say about the faith you put in your advisory boards to dismiss their very purpose? What does it say about the value of their very charge to be overruled by a group of very vocal and influential people and their attorneys simply because they don't like it? The Historic District Study Committee is a standing committee of the Kalamazoo Historic Preservation Board, a city advisory board, not unlike the other city advisory boards, the Environmental Concerns Committee, the Parks and Rec Board, and the Zoning Board of Appeals. These boards were established by the city and staffed with citizen volunteers with their role to advise the City Commission on matters involving the city. The KCHP's charge is to advise the City Commission on actions which impact this community's historic resources. The KCHP over the past 50 years has helped establish the South Street Historic District, the Vine Neighborhood Historic District, the Stewart Area Historic District, the Rose Place Historic District, the Haymarket Historic District, and the West Main Historic Districts. This process has worked well, and the city and its citizens have benefited from its accomplishments. That is, until today. Today, you want to short-circuit that process by throwing a wrench into the ongoing study. And why? Because some very some people are challenging it. They don't like it, they don't want it. That will always be the case in efforts like this, but it doesn't mean you give up or give in. Nothing would get done or be protected if we simply gave in to the critics. Sometimes proposals that are good for the long-term betterment of a community challenge individuals' or groups' private property rights, but that's one of the consequences of living in a society. As part of Imagine Kalamazoo, the city has taken the initiative to develop the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, the NFP. This initiative has the goal of preserving many of the city's natural resources for future generations to enjoy. How forward-looking. I commend the city staff who have worked well and hard to make this a reality. It's not without its detractors or critics, but it appears the city is committed to the process. The objective of the ordinance is to put in place a guide for the development of land near or areas identified as natural features in order to achieve long-term protection of the area. It occurred to me that the objective of the ordinance is actually very similar to that of the historic district designation. Both are overlay zones, and where the NFP ordinance is designed to protect the city's natural features, the local historic district is designed to protect the city's natural built environment. Both are multifaceted processes that allow for several public meetings and input sessions. So what you currently have in place, the NFP ordinance, it is well received by most and is working well so far. Both the historic district ordinance and the NFP ordinance place restrictions on what you can do with your property. Both may delay some properties and both may cost property owners money, but one the city endorses and the other they don't. I hold no illusions that this commission will pass either of these historic districts, but I ask that you at least treat preservation and conservation of historic built-in.
Thank you, sir. Next, please. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Leah Gugino. I also live in the West Main Hill neighborhood. And, you know, I certainly hope that you will consider adhering to process. I mean, I've heard some very eloquent speakers tonight talk about listening to the citizens of the community. And although people may not like historic districts or have concerns about it, there is obviously concern here that there's not a proper process that is being adhered to. The other thing I would ask you about historic districts is how many of you have been to Europe and why do you go? You don't go to look at new buildings, you go to look at the history. Take it all down and it's not what you go to see. And I'm not just talking about the Eiffel Tower, there's a density of buildings that give it meaning. And without that, you have empty spaces. And that's not to say that it's important to have green spaces. There have been comments made that historic preservationists don't care about children. As a pediatrician for 30 years, I can tell you that preservation is extraordinarily important to children. It gives you sense of place. It helps you respect what people built before you and to help you respect that. In addition, we're not filling up the landfills. And I think that that's really important, that we leave an environment for our children that we value. How many of you have brought your children down to the park for art in the park, for Christmas in the park? I brought my children here, and it's because of the way it looks. It is the heart of our city, and tearing that down is a crime. It's also not creative. We have a Kalamazoo Institute of Art. Where's the creativity in destroying art? I would ask that great artists can see beauty in what they have and can make it better and preserve that. So I would like to say I think it's important that you adhere to the process and that you consider that when you're deliberating tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Patty Owens, and I live in Plainwell, but I do represent a building owner in Kalamazoo, Catalyst Development Company, which includes the property at 211 South Rose Street, which is intended to become part of the new Bronson Park Historic District. First of all, I would like to say that I respect and admire every person that I work with within the city, from the planners to the historic folks to all of you. So what I am going to say is not a reflection on how I feel they do their jobs, which I think is exemplary. I love our historic districts in Kalamazoo. I'm very proud of them. I feel that this process was not done the way that it probably should have been done. As a developer of a lot of real estate in the city of Kalamazoo. We were not even brought into the whole idea of creating this historic district until 2 months ago. And I've had the opportunity to attend 3 meetings. This is the 3rd one about this particular process. I'm not opposed to the policy of putting another historic district in place in the city of Kalamazoo, but the process has been very lacking, and that is why I'm here today. I think we can do better. I think we need to do better, particularly for the 501c3s and the private developers who made investments, millions and millions of dollars, only to have, it feels like, this kind of pushed at us without a lot of meaningful dialogue or an opportunity to actually give input. And so while I appreciate the hard work of all the folks within the city and the various agencies that did the study for the last 3 years, I think we need to go back and start the process over and include these folks that have the vested interest in these real property assets in the various districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening, Honorable Commissioners. My name is Nathan Dannison. I live in the Vine Neighborhood Historic District at 604 South Rose Street in the Ira Bixby House. I'm the 29th senior pastor of the First Congregational Church across the park. I've spoke to you before about this. However, we're learning quickly. This has been in process for 3 years, but we only learned about it a little bit over a month ago. Our feelings is that the standards for rehabilitation were not correctly applied in this case, and that our local historic Preservation Commission failed to follow best practices, state guidelines, and federal guidelines throughout this process. I'll cite only 2. SHPO states at the state level that educating the public about the historic significance of a proposed district is the responsibility of the Historic District Study Committee. The public hearing should not be the first time the public is informed of the study. That's in the state guidelines. The committee should include the public in the study process from the beginning as soon as the decision is made to undertake any study. Including the public in the process will help to increase their understanding and acceptance of this district designation. This study was initiated 3 years ago. It was kept from the public and specifically kept from the owners who would be included in this district. When asked why that was done, city staff responded that that's how development works. Unfortunately, we don't view this as a development that's working for us. In fact, this process is actively harming us, and it's harming our free exercise of religion on Church Square. Also, the state guidelines say that that the composition of the committee follows best practices when and only if it includes membership of the property owners that will be affected by the proposal. We have about 660 members at my church. I know all of them pretty well, and none of them are currently serving on the Historic Preservation Commission. At the end of the day, this proposal is flawed. We need to begin again with all of the stakeholders at the table. And I want to say something, too, that's been bothering me since the start of this process. People keep talking about the First Reformed Church. A church is not a building. The church that my congregation lives in has been there for a little bit over 90 years, but our church is 185 years old. Our church is older than the city of Kalamazoo. Our church is significantly older than the Historic Preservation Commission. We're not going anywhere. When we found out that the demolition of this building might take place, we reached out and spoke with every living member of the First Reformed Church. Every one. We interviewed them. You know who didn't interview them? Was the Historic Preservation Commission. But we wanted to hear from them. And they expressed their consensus support for the playscape idea and felt that that would be a marvelous legacy for a congregation that has not existed for nearly 2 decades. I understand the need for infill upscale development downtown. I get it, and my desire is not to prevent the city from generating tax revenue through new condos, through new development. But stripping the historic designation from Historic Church Square that's been in place for almost 200 years in order to force the churches to cede their property to developers is not the way to bring upscale development downtown. It will change the face of Bronson Park forever. And that's why we're asking that you put this to a stop. And if you decide to do so, we will work to bring everyone to the table, create a new neighborhood plan for Bronson Park that meets the designations of the city master plan. We will take on that responsibility if you will help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is Al Jackson. I am not a resident of the city. I'm also here on behalf of Mrs. Terry Novaria, who is also not a resident of the city. We support the establishment of these local historic districts, including Bronson Park, and allowing this process to continue. And as I understand the motion now, I would oppose it. I have 5 short points. One is that a repurposed First Reformed building, which is 302 Academy, could be used all year long and not just for 6 months when the weather was nice. Secondly, a repurposed building would honor the descendants of those first Dutch settlers in Kalamazoo and the many contributions they have made to our city for 170 years. I am not Dutch, but I appreciate what they've done. Thirdly, I am a member of Second Reformed Church, which was a merger with First Reformed people. We have many First Reformed people in our church, and they are not accepting of this idea. Clearly, they are not. So I'm not sure who's been speaking to whom. Fourthly, there was a letter to the editor from Bice and Associates with a design proposal that retained the First Reformed building with open park space and community event space. And they called it a vibrant repurposing of that building at 302 Academy. I think that's very important. And lastly, let's seek a win-win outcome of public space and building preservation. 302 Academy is worth preserving. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Pam O'Connor. I'm a city resident, and I live and work in a local downtown historic district. I support taking the established local district process through to the end, now or later. Our city staff and local advocates know how local districts really work. It's positive, and it makes no difference if they are residential or commercial. Pope Francis supported historic preservation in his 2015 encyclical. And the great buildings at Nazareth that we should protect could make a huge contribution toward helping us all resolve our homeless and affordable housing crisis in Kalamazoo. If Nazareth said yes to that, historic designation could help a developer find funding, and Nazareth would not waste the money and the energy taking the buildings down. I wish the First Congregational Church would sell 302 Academy without its perpetual use restrictions. It would relieve them of what they clearly now view as a great burden, and simple buildings like this, in context with the others in the district, are full of opportunity. There is a demonstrated interest, and there are ways to help financially assist a new owner in addressing physical problems there. It would be productive to talk with the KIA about the Christian Science Church and the challenges it believes makes the building unusable. We have knowledgeable local and state historic preservation officials and consultants and talented architects who have successfully adapted churches for other uses, including spaces for institutional and gallery use, and we could help find the resources for real historic preservation building assessments. If you have read the district study reports, you know they were prepared only when the threats to these buildings were elevated and imminent. I've been actively engaged in the civic matters for many years, and that's long enough to have had many people say to me many times, "How could you let that demolition happen?" when another great building was thrown into a hole in the ground. Do you remember the Upjohn Research Tower, Commissioner Cooney?
I do.
And now here we are, trying not to let that happen again, and are criticized by some of our city commissioners and others for it, while you consider asking to short-circuit the process. A process that includes 3 public hearings and 2 other reviews, one of which is also public, and for you to suggest stopping the established legal process by which your Preservation Commission advises you before the process has even moved to the second step, not only subverts your own process, you set a very dangerous precedent. I gladly pay my taxes because I think that you, all of you, and the city has its head on straight in a lot of ways. What I also understand is that a portion of those taxes go to providing services to the many nonprofits that operate here at no charge to them. Still, I'm happy to pay my taxes because that allows all of us to use and enjoy the many good things these organizations and their buildings offer to us. However, I strongly object to allowing the wishes of a small number of nonprofits to take precedence over our established law, plans, and procedures, and I don't think I'm alone. It is in your own best interest and the public's interest to allow this process to proceed when the KHPC decides it should, and I really hope you will.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
My name is Claire Milne. I live in the city. I believe there's some confusion regarding the historic district study process. Words like delay, moratorium, dragging out for months have been bandied about without knowing exactly what they mean. So here's the process. It starts with recognition as a national trust district. The Historic Preservation Commission's charter allows them to study areas that may benefit from protection as a local historic district, and they are charged with creating the study. When the study is complete, a public information hearing is held. All comments become part of the study. This has already happened. The study is sent to the state historical offices for written comments. The study goes to the Planning Commission for their review. The final report with all comments is sent to the City Commission for 2 public hearings, and a vote takes place after the second hearing. You can establish the district, or you cannot establish the district. We're almost halfway through this process with hundreds of hours of dedicated work by many people. I've served on the Historic Preservation Commission in the past, and none of you has any idea how hard those people work to keep the character of our city. When you drive down a street in a historic district and admire the beautiful buildings and how they look and what a sense of place that gives this city, you can thank those people on those commissions, not only for how it looks, but how it contributes to the city's coffers through tax revenue. We know that historic district status alone spikes property value. Furthermore, if 1 or 2 property owners can dismantle the work of a citizen advisory board, you have set a very dangerous precedent. Right now, there are 38 vacancies on Kalamazoo's various citizen advisory boards and commissions. If the work they do can be undone by a few angry voices, what incentive is there to serve on a city board or commission? None. So finish the process and then vote.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jody Berlinski. I live in the county of Kalamazoo, but not the city of Kalamazoo. Creating historic preservation is a noble but very complex process. We've heard many weeks, seen many documents that speak to this issue. You mentioned, the speakers have mentioned to follow the process. Process is only as good as it is practiced. That's why there are best practices put out there to allow for dialogue and for the complexities of making such a rich decision to be taken care of. There is, in a study, you would expect a study would be objective. It would look at all things, the pros, the cons, the people who are for, the people who are against. That is not what this study gives you. It gives you a very well-researched historical account written by people who love history, and they should, and as we all do, and to preserve their goal as their charge is to preserve buildings that would speak to those historical accounts. What we're saying is that it's much more complex than that. To preserve some history, you might have to lose some history. It's not an all or none situation. But by creating these two historic districts, you're creating an all or none situation. There's been a lot of what ifs. We could find developers. We could help you sell. We could do these things. The owners, some of us, have looked at this for 3 years. We've looked at the practicalities of trying to save buildings, to try to find development. Yes, restrictions are put in to preserve the real history, which was the purpose of the church park and the use of the land around it, not just the bricks and mortar that are going with it. So I urge you to pass the resolution. Allowing it to go through the process now allows a failed process, in my view, because it's biased. It doesn't take in the complexities, doesn't take in the best practices of what should be done to really create this type of a large-scale, all or none historic districts. So I urge you to pass the resolution to stop it.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Rex Bruggeman. I'm a member of the First Congregational Church. I'm a member of what's called the Playscape Committee. I was previously a member of the committee charged with negotiating an option agreement with DTI if possible. I would ask that you adopt the proposed resolution directing the Historic Commission to suspend and take no further action toward the possible establishment of either a Bronson Park or Nazareth Campus Historic District. Even the threat of adoption of a historic district applied specifically to the property at 302 Academy forecloses our ability to proceed toward our proposed use of the property. We ought to be able to proceed unencumbered by the imposition of a historic district. We are asking this commission to be proactive. The Historic Commission is a creature of the City Commission. And to take it back a step, in this instance, DTI examined this property and engaged with the First Congregational Church for a total of over 1.5 years. I'll also note that the City of Kalamazoo considered and rejected entering into an option agreement in relation to this property. The city should not take, through imposition of a historic district, what it was not willing to buy as to this property. And let me say that again. The city should not be comfortable taking control of the development of a piece of property for a period of time where it was not willing to buy that same right through an option agreement. I would submit that that really ought to give you pause. I wish I was here talking about the proposed playscape. Our committee previously was talking about all aspects of creating a very cool environment for young children to enjoy at 302 Academy. That's the activity we've been really engaged in for the last 6 months. I'd like to get back to that, and I would ask you to please allow us to return to that work. I want to respond to a couple other issues I heard mentioned here tonight. One was the BICE report. And what I think is interesting about the BICE report done in cooperation with DTI was that the uses described in that report, the proposed development, actually conformed largely with greenlit uses under the option agreement. That'd be okay. And I submit to you, the problem was that DTI would have preferred not to have a developer constrained just to uses like that. So don't be confused by that report. If it was just about a development like that, that wasn't the issue, okay? There are other things at work here. The other thing I want to let you know is I've been a member of the FCC for a few years, and so it's a relatively new thing for me, especially given the history of that church. One thing I found wonderful about that church is that there are people in their 70s there working on important issues for that church. That church is the church that their grandparents attended, and it's now the church that their grandchildren are attending. So you've got people who are working on a generational approach. Their timeline involves 50 to 100 years. And so I want you to know from the inside out, that is the kind of historical perspective that is being lived at the FCC and reflects in everything they do. So please take that into account, including people who are opposed to our position. Please don't judge us too harshly. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Eric Johnson. I'm here on behalf of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. I'm here to reiterate what I brought to your attention about a month ago, that we strongly oppose our property at 224 South Park Street being included in the proposed local historic district. I'm here tonight to say that we do support the resolution that you have proposed before you. We are in agreement with the previous owners, the congregation that built our church, the congregation of the First Church of Christ Scientist, who originally objected the building's inclusion in historic districts in 1976 and 1982. So we are going to reiterate that. As owners of the First Church of Christ Scientists building since 2006, so nearly 13 years, we are certain that we would not be able to maintain the building in the manner the proposed district would require. The proposed historic district would cause an unreasonable burden on our organization. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Sister Pat Warburton. I'm a resident of Kalamazoo. I've been a Sister of St. Joseph for 50 years. I consider the location known as Nazareth as my home. Nazareth is a very large home, almost 273,000 square feet, equivalent to 5 football fields. The sisters have spent many years responding to the needs of Kalamazoo, beginning with the hospital, moving to child care and education at many levels, and care of our earth. We sponsored a halfway home for single women known as Bethany in a local historic district. Times change, needs change. I have been part of congregational committees who for over the past 20 years have networked and partnered with many groups in hopes of finding realistic, implementable, sustainable, and comprehensive use for our property while continuing to care for the earth. Our congregation has determined that there is no viable ministry partner for use of our current structures. As a member of the congregational leadership team, I firmly oppose the creation of Nazareth Local Historic District. I have always pictured Nazareth as my retreat home, as my retirement home. I ask you to respect our rights as property owners and as ministry leaders, and allow us to continue to determine how we will live on our land and use our resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Sister Kathy Brazda, and I live in Chicago, but I serve as the president of the Congregation of St. Joseph, and I consider the Mother House in Nazareth my home too. And so I would like to ask my sisters to stand up. Oh, they already stood. We're here. Thank you. To stand up with me here, because I speak not on my behalf, but on behalf of my congregation. We firmly oppose the creation of a historical district that would include our property at Nazareth. We've served the people of Kalamazoo, which was pointed out by a few of the speakers, in many ways over the past 130 years. And we'd like to continue to serve and be in ministry here in Kalamazoo. Our land is sacred to us, and our home for our sisters is important to us. We have spent 20-some years creatively looking at the best ways to take care of our sisters, our buildings, and our land. And in the past 5 years, we met with over 20 groups to try to find partners to utilize our building. We explored with them ways that this building could be used that would be realistic, sustainable, implementable, and comprehensive. And no partner was found because of the size of the building. As a part of this process, we received approval from the Papal Nuncio in Rome to continue with our plans. Our rights to make decisions about our own property are obvious. The historic designation proposed would deplete our financial resources and have a negative effect on so many parts of our lives. And it would really also prevent us from putting those resources towards serving vulnerable populations in Kalamazoo. Maintaining the costs of unused and empty buildings in Nazareth would be a crushing blow for us. Please do not take this action and hurt how our sisters would like to live, work, and minister in Kalamazoo. We love being in Kalamazoo. We love the community and people of Kalamazoo more than we love our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Manju Freeman. Though I am both socially or ecumenically inclined to side with either group here, I will unfortunately have to choose the stance of an arbitrator, and I must admit that's not a stance that I take frequently.
Sir, can you tell us if you live in the city?
I do live in the city of Kalamazoo. I apologize. The reason why I'm choosing to take this stance as an arbitrator is that there's a very inobvious yet very frequent weakness that I've actually noticed from actual both sides, even though both sides are not present, at least not vocally. Noticed that there seems to be a separation in the perception of both sides, where there seems to be an implicit bias from both angles. One angle, we have a perception of a gerontocracy, while on the other angle, we have a perception of an ageism. So what that will cause that there's immediately an assumption on what either one side wants or what side needs without there actually being a conversation between the two. So because there's no conversation of the two, because from what I'm noticing is that there are a lot of concerns that are being brought to the commission, but it does not seem as though there have been actual voiced concerns to any type of opposition, and that goes for the opposing side as well. That goes for vice versa. So I'm not going to actually push any type of, I'm not going to impose any type of ideology as far as like what I believe needs to be done right now, because from my stance, I will consider myself ignorant of what both sides are actually considering. But what I will actually consider is that there should be some form of arbitration, and both sides should actually consider speaking to each other first before we assume that we have to present our argument to the commission, because actually if it is stated by, by state or federal law that the commission is put in charge of this, then they actually have no choice but to be put in charge of it. So my proposal is that there needs to be more of a conversation between between whatever opposing sides there are before there can be a full and logical presentation of what needs to be done right now at this moment. And it really seems as though that both sides have actually failed to do so.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Tony Holowinski. I live in the city of Kalamazoo. I also work in 3 historic districts. Just short points, follow the established process. There needs to be 3 public hearings on the subject, and not following the process sets a very bad precedence. Not following through with the local district creation will likely discourage investment in downtown. We'll lose our sense of place through demolition, and it'll be less appealing and cohesive. 302 Academy is not unsalvageable. We've seen buildings with far greater challenges, including trees growing through the roof and second floors burned out, repaired. If First Congregational Church can't do this, they should sell it unencumbered of restrictions to someone who can. I care about my community, but I've now been repeatedly shamed by a member of the commission for expressing my concerns. This is inappropriate, but it does not discourage my interest in civic participation. I firmly believe that an enlightened public is an engaged public. I hope in the future we would receive the same public respect from you that we give you. And please remember, Commissioners, that while you've heard from some very vocal property owners within the proposed Bronson Park District, you have not heard from about half of the owners. That may be because they have not yet formed an opinion, because they approve but don't want to get in a public disagreement, or because they are simply neutral on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Pat Lennon. I'm an attorney with the Honigman firm. I represent the Sisters of St. Joseph. I'm not located in the city of Kalamazoo, but am very familiar with it, as you all know. I'm not sure what I can say that can convey the message any better than the sisters did, or that can convey the message any more powerfully than their ongoing support and presence in all of these meetings. I think they make their point better than any lawyer ever could. I will point out a few things, though, since I do have a few minutes to do that. And one is an observation, and I think I may have made this before, but to me, the fundamental flaw in this whole process, and where I feel like the Preservation Commission may be, tripped up, and this is a group that's known for doing very good work. But in this case, I think the real core flaw was the original beginning of these proposed districts, which didn't come from the neighborhoods themselves. I'm an Urban Land Institute guy. I do a lot of development, and we like historic districts, and we know what they're saying about values. But in virtually every case, historic districts are organic. They begin in the neighborhoods. The neighbors want them. They talk to their neighbor. They develop a common theme for their community, and it germinates from there. And they create this theme that carries forward, and that's where the value comes from. The ownership that the actual landowners have in these districts. That's not present here. In fact, this is the opposite. In this case, you have what feels like government agents imposing on landowners that are kind of minding their own business. And that's a struggle, and I think that's what's created a lot of the acrimony, and in the case of the sisters, real extreme anxiety. Now, I'm already on a detour, so I'll get to some of my points. With respect to Nazareth, think about that property. It's not appropriate for this kind of a district, and it should be relieved right away. It's isolated. It's removed from the city. It's in a distant area. There's no public element to it. There aren't even public roads. It's a private area that's always been private. Perhaps most importantly, there's only one landowner. So I don't even know how you can call that a district. That's just somebody's property. Now, to make matters, that I think are worse, is a lot of this is being driven by the fact that it's a reaction to their plans for their property. And that's troubling, because when they finally completed this, something like 2 decades of study, and began their process, that's when they learned about these actions that threaten to obstruct their process. So those are problematic on a number of levels. It's just a bad idea in the first place. And if things continue to proceed, I'm sure we'll start talking about legal sides of things and the burdens these things create. Now, I know I'm running out of time, but I know you all know how much it costs to maintain these antiquated, old and failing buildings. That's been brought to everyone's attention. What the sisters' goal is part of this process, which I think they've made clear to the city through meetings with subgroups from the Historic Preservation Commission and others, is that they'd like to be in a position to free up financial resources that they can then use to better serve our community. So their goals here, just as their hearts are pristine. They've studied the alternatives. They've looked at this for literally decades, and this is their best path forward. We hope that the city will allow them to take those steps, and that in that way we'll all see the benefit. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Next, please. Good evening, Commissioner.
Good evening, Mayor. How are you?
Doing okay.
Good to see you. My name is, I hate microphones. My name is Zadie Jackson. I've lived in Kalamazoo for approximately 77 years. I once sat up there where you are. I was a city commissioner for a while. I volunteered at a place called Youth Advancement Academy, which is a high school for young people who've been expelled from from any of the schools. It doesn't have to be just the Kalamazoo Public Schools. And what else was I going to say? Something very important, no doubt. Oh, I know what it was. I was the last employee of Nazareth College. This is what I want to talk with you about, and then I'll get into anyway. I was the last employee of Nazareth College. What's left of that college are 2 dorms. Yeah, they're dorms. That's all they are. They're dorms. They've got bedrooms, they've got bathrooms, they've got a kitchen, they've got a cafeteria, they got recreation rooms, all the things dorms had. I remember teenagers living there. They were called Nazareth College students. It was a family. The staff ate in the cafeteria, the students ate in the cafeteria, the people from Dillon Hall ate in the cafeteria. It was a family. They took care of each other. And we got a problem in this town, at least that's what I was told this summer by the Gazette. We've got over 100 kids who are homeless. Nazareth College, what's left of it, is a dorm. How much better that those 100 kids, and the sisters say they want to help in Kalamazoo, how much better that those 100 kids are living in a dorm, in a bedroom, with a bathroom, with a cafeteria. Many years ago, I was at and this is, you'll understand this, Mayor. I was at a party that Mark was at, and the man whose daughter my son was dating happened to be the CEO of Miller Davis. And he said to me, and I quote, "The best buildings I ever built were the Nazareth College buildings. They'll last forever." They weren't the prettiest, they weren't the most spectacular, but they were the best. So I'm asking you, and I know that it doesn't have a whole lot to do about tonight. Oh, I still got a whole minute left. I want you to think about that. What you as a commission could do that would help the sisters, but would better yet help our homeless teens, who really in many ways are our future. I'm going to tell you one more thing. When I was sitting up there and I had something similar to what you're voting on tonight before me, I got a call from a very wise city manager in Iowa who said, "Mother," and when he says mother, I listen. If it was mom, I probably wouldn't have. "Let your boards do their job, and then you do yours. Don't interfere with your boards, or you're not going to have boards and commissions." I think that's it. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Next, please. No. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Ken Nachi. I represent Plaza Corp Realty Advisors. Plaza Corp, as you're aware, is a private developer that has invested millions of dollars in projects in the city of Kalamazoo and throughout the community in the county. And it currently owns the Kalamazoo County Courthouse. I came up here really because I'm not quite sure what we are discussing this evening. It seems to be that we're discussing process. Plaza Corp has not really weighed in on the process. It has an opinion on the district, but the process leads to that conversation, at which point we would certainly want to participate in whether or not we support or oppose a historic district in Bronson Park. So if I'm mistaken, the resolution is to alter the process, and so I won't speak to that, and nor will I speak to our opinion on the district until the time the process allows that. So, yes.
Thank you. Anyone else wanting to address the commission this evening? Seeing no one, commissioners, the requested action is a motion to approve the policy amendment. Is there a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. There is not a requested action, actually. So commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I move the passage of the resolution.
Moved by Commissioner Cooney. Support. Supported by Vice Mayor Knott. Discussion, commissioners? This should be fun. Commissioner Sykes.
Wasn't sure if I should go first or not. Okay. I've got a couple of comments and then also a question, point for clarification, but maybe I will address my comments first. So first and foremost, I want to apologize to the sisters for the minimization of your voices and being referred to as just custodians. I don't believe that to be true or not, and I saw a couple of reactions in the audience when those words were shared, so I wanted to apologize for that experience tonight. I'm also feeling like I need to be really transparent in my frustrations with this process, and the reason that I shared some of my frustrations with you all at our last meeting. And that is this. In all transparency, I think that if we are talking about the entirety of this process, how it started, and where we find ourselves today, at least as I understand it, and having spoken to a good number of the owners of these properties, it is that, and I believe one or two, or maybe two of the attorneys mentioned it tonight, this is a reaction to try to keep property owners from doing what they plan to do with their property, as opposed to a sort of proactive, wow, I really love these buildings, I want to hold on to them. It was more a reaction to, oh no, they're going to do this with these buildings, we have to stop them. The reason that I think that's important is because we also need to be honest about the fact that there are some developers here in the mix. And so part of the impetus for saving some of these properties is because there are developers already with their eyes on these properties. I respect the work and the position of commissions, I do. And I have a very personal, and this is me being transparent, as fully, as transparent as I am able, in saying that I have a big issue with well-resourced developers utilizing systems that were set up to increase citizen voice in order to advance their motives for profit. And so again, I want to be clear, this is me being transparent about what I am most frustrated about in this process. I find it ironic that there's an argument to protect and preserve buildings through a historic preservation designation by requiring the removal of protections put in place on a particular square at the beginning of the founding of this city. Again, we are implementing new protections in order to remove protections of Church Square that have been there since the beginning of this city. That to me is ironic. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I also want to say we seem to be having trouble hearing our fellow citizens, our neighbors, when they express their hardships to us. So when the sisters say $80,000 a month is too much for our organization, we need to hear that. We need to hear that. And comparing it to, the budget of the city and the things that we advocate for, up here, those are two very different issues. When we have other owners of property in these districts, the KIA, First Congregational Church, when we have folks telling us this presents a hardship for me, I can't do this. We need to hear that. I think that's really important. And, somebody mentioned, curbing violence and, us getting along and relationship building and those sorts of things. And I think the first step of that is hearing our neighbors when they say, this is hard for me. I will, real quick, and I'm going to wrap up here in a second and leave it to my colleagues to weigh in. I do feel the need to address the feelings that I had ridiculed folks for their Dutch heritage, and reiterate what I said at the last meeting that may or may not have been missed. I am Dutch. Let me say that again, because I know it might be hard to absorb, see me and my skin color and my hair and all of this, and the fact that I do advocate for my African ancestors quite a bit, and other people of color. I am Dutch. I am Dutch. And so when I hear my Dutch ancestors used as an excuse to force this on landowners, property owners, I take issue with that. This does not honor me. This does not honor my mother. This does not honor my grandparents, who spent a huge amount of time being active in this community. It does not honor the people that I come from. So let me be clear, I did not intend to ridicule anyone. What I was trying to express that night was that I am Dutch, and I recognize that some aspects of our heritage are really positive, and others are really horrific. Really horrific. And that's okay to acknowledge. And it's not meant to be an attack on anyone. I do have a few more thoughts that I'd like to share on just the feeling that I am attacking white folks up here, but I'll save that for miscellaneous city commissioner comments, because I don't feel that it's relevant anymore to this conversation. But I'll say one other thing. Yes, I am a strong advocate for housing, affordable housing for homeless folks. And I'm a strong advocate for a municipal shelter. Absolutely. And if one of these properties were to be used by the city to provide shelter to folks, I would be 100% down for that. I would be a huge supporter of that. And as far as I know, and my colleagues will have to correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that the city is right now putting money into a municipal shelter. And a historic district is not necessary to do so. I've spoken to the sisters about the property. A historic district, should the city decide to partner with the sisters to turn the Nazareth building into a shelter, that would not require a historic district to do so. And I am not speaking for anyone in saying that that would even be a viable conversation to have. But we're conflating two issues here. And I will reiterate what I said at the last meeting that I think led to people feeling as if they were, quote, being ridiculed, and that is this. If you are going to conflate housing and homelessness with this issue and protecting historic buildings for developers' purposes, I do greatly, greatly hope, I really do, that you will also be here when this body takes up the conversation of what we can do to house our homeless residents. Please come back for those conversations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, you mentioned you had a question too, so I wanted to make sure you had up.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. One of our citizens who commented mentioned something about feeling like the process had not been followed the way that it should have been, and that there was a possibility to begin again. And I guess what I'm asking, maybe to you, City Attorney, is that true? If this resolution were to pass tonight, could this group then come back and start this process over in a way that follows the intention of the process and also includes the owners of the properties in that process?
Mr. Attorney?
Commissioner, the short answer is yes. I'm sorry, the short answer is yes.
Thank you.
Other commissioners' comments? Folks, so commissioners, please, if you want to speak, please dive in. I saw Commissioner Urban first, though. No sense in waiting.
Commissioner Knott first. Go ahead.
Commissioner, I'm Vice
Mayor.
All right. Start by announcing my conflicts again. I am a member of FCC, If my membership fee hasn't expired, I'm a member of the KIA. And to the 15 or so sisters that are standing out there, I worked with Sister Simone Campbell in 2012, opposing Paul Ryan's horrible budget with the Nuns on the Bus tour. So thank you so much for your service. It's a pleasure having you here tonight, unfortunately for these circumstances. I think for me, the smell factor doesn't work. I'm sitting here hearing that we've been talking about this, or that there's a governing body that's been talking about this work for 3 years, and that the work is halfway done. So one of the questions I ask myself is, so we're talking about another 3 years. I hear 3 years, but last year, and actually beginning in 2017, we had a tremendous amount of discussion as it related to the fountain that was in the park, and we never heard about a study related to the Bronson Park Historic District, proposed district, as an example. And so I agree with Commissioner Sykes, I agree with some of the other speakers that have been out there, that this just feels like an 11th hour, last-ditch attempt to stop individual property owners from doing what they want to do with their properties. And that doesn't feel right to me. I understand that, you know, we could allow this to drag on for another 15 days, 30 days, etc. But even in an email that all of us received, and I think we had a speaker here tonight that spoke on behalf of her email, she suggested that this ultimately, probably her words, would not pass if we got down the road to the actual historic district proposal. Those were her words to us in an email last week. And to Commissioner Urban's point earlier about 2 resolutions, I can't compartmentalize Nazareth over Bronson Park. To me, my talking points to everybody that has reached out to me, to everybody that I've communicated with, to the numerous property owners around the Bronson Park that I reached out to last week and had a conversation with, this to me is about property owners and their rights to do what they want to do with their property. And I'm sorry, for me personally, when I think about my 4-year-old nephew or the other children that are in my life, it's about investing in their future and investing in this community with our time and talents and resources, and not investing in a building that has been determined to no longer be functional without several millions and millions of dollars of investment. And maybe I want to yield my time now to turn it over to my colleague, Commissioner Anderson, because we had a conversation, and you're the better expert than I am on this. But I have had, I'll yield in just a second if there's an actual point, but I've had, from the folks that are in disagreement with me, the 2 talking points have been that I built the early part of my career working at LISC on affordable housing initiatives. So all sorts of conversations about what particularly the Nazareth campus can do related to affordable housing. And then there are the folks that must have picked up that I am not happy with the idea of reintroducing more bulk trash pickup days, because I'm getting a lot about, if I cared about the environment, I wouldn't let the demolitions of these properties happen because it's going to fill our landfills. And to you folks, I appreciate that, and I hope that you'll come back, because it seems like it's on our agenda at some point to talk about adding more bulk trash pickup days, and I don't want to do that. But to the point about Nazareth and affordable housing, it's my understanding that the experts from Grand Rapids, because I know that this model has worked in Grand Rapids, but Denny Sturdivant from Dwelling Place has been down here, looked at the Nazareth property. Denny, for those of you in the audience that don't know who he is one of the premier affordable housing providers in the state of Michigan. I've underwritten several of his low-income housing projects when I worked for LISC, and he came down, toured the property, and said it's not a feasible property for an affordable housing project. Is that correct?
I'll just answer that quickly. Yes, it's correct, but it wasn't just one visit. I toured the building with him. Subsequent to that, he had many of his staff members come down. You know that that Dwelling Place is a nonprofit that has a great expertise in this area, and they did a careful evaluation of that site. And unfortunately, we're not able to come up with a model that would work for it.
And there's a local developer here that also is an expert in affordable housing redevelopment, multi-unit, not small scattered sites, and they also toured the property at Nazareth multiple times and said it's not feasible, correct? They couldn't get the pro forma to work. Okay. So I think with that, as well as just again, we're focusing so much on process. The process doesn't work for me. It doesn't feel right. It feels again like this last minute Hail Mary, sorry sisters, attempt to stop the work from going forward. And for the 3-some years that I've been on this commission, The mantra has been, we got to do better as it relates to community engagement and transparency. And I just have way too many questions as it relates to 3 years and where was this conversation, particularly last year, around the fountain, and why in the world are the property owners and this commission, why did we just learn about this about 6-8 weeks ago? Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you, Mayor Hopewell. Well, I think maybe it's time for me to kind of give what some of my motivations are and maybe a path forward here. I think that there have been some missteps along the way in how this historic district study got started. It does seem to be quite delayed, but the thing is, we haven't decided anything yet. So far, we just have a study report. Nothing has happened that says anything that could happen can still happen. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be next week or next month or 3 months from now. I fully expect that whatever needs to be resolved could be resolved within 4 months now that everybody has their attention focused on it. It's too unfortunate that a lot of folks did not focus on it to the degree that I needed to in a public enough way early on. And so now we're suffering from that. And so rather than say, well, because so much time has passed, we're just going to chuck it all out, how does that help anything? That really says the process was flawed, and so we're going to end it. I would much prefer that the process be repaired and that we, of course, with these last 2 meetings, you've had a couple of pretty effective public meetings already, but still not everybody has been heard from officially in a way that it would be if the Historic Preservation Commission completed the path that it is supposed to follow according to the charter. So far, they've done that, albeit imperfecly. So what I would like to suggest is that now we have the issue before us, that my preference, just so you know where I'm coming from, is for us to vote down this resolution, substitute a second resolution that has to do with the Nazareth property. And that one I feel is too far gone to have any chance of having that become a historic district. I'm guided a lot by what I've learned about the efforts that have been made to try to make it into some affordable housing or some housing for the homeless. And those efforts have proved unsuccessful. That area is not in the center of the city. It is not part of what is the vibrant center of what people identify as Kalamazoo or downtown Kalamazoo. So if the resolution were broken into 2 parts, I could find myself voting in favor of discontinuing work on the Nazareth property. But the second part is the other historic district study process, review process. It's not creating a historic district. That is not happening yet. It can't happen yet until several other things are to occur. We can still follow those things and get that done within 3 or 4 months. Given what's at stake in terms of how the city sees itself, I think it's worth honoring the city ordinances and the people, commission, and the people who are members of the commission to carry that through. And then we'll, if it comes to the commission as a recommendation to create a district, well, fine, we will have heard from everybody in an official way, in a correct way, and no one will feel dissed or disregarded on account of the city commission making a precipitate action here. So I think at the very least, I'll just say this now because I may not have an opportunity to say anything more depending on how votes go, that it's possible at this stage to really stop, take a deep breath, and begin over again with the process of studying whether or not to create a historic district, a local historic district around Bronson Park. There's a lot of misunderstanding on both sides on this issue, and a lot of heat has been generated due to misunderstandings. I would hope that regardless of what we decide tonight, that the people who are involved in the downtown properties do what they can to actually listen to each other and at the very least create a vibrant downtown neighborhood that has history, even if they don't create an historic district. I mean, we can do better than for us to just jump over all the city commissioner, this historic district commission folks. And so I think that that's why I'm advocating breaking the resolution into two parts. And in order to get to that, we have to vote down the first resolution as it stands now. So I'm just laying it all out for you, and then the rest of us, along with me, will decide what to do. Okay?
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cunningham?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm torn, I'm frustrated. There's a lot of thoughts, I think a lot of ideologies that apply. I think one of my biggest frustrations is when we run into situations where we're very reactive versus being proactive. We are seeing a situation, whether you feel that way or not, where the Historic District Commission is being weaponized to step in and champion for what they are intended to do. And what I would say to those of that commission, thank you for your work. I know that it is labor intensive, but I also would take into consideration, a strong consideration, as how this perception is being reflected upon you, whether intentional or unintentional. That's something that you know, I have spoke to the city staff about considering zoning when it comes to issues where we are being reactive versus proactive in our zoning. Don't bring me an issue after an issue is brought up, the reason why we're having this discussion. So I'm very frustrated in that space. The Historic Commission, I mean, the responsibility, I believe, the intent is so we can keep the characteristics of certain parts of our community. And for me, I'm conflicted because I enjoy those characteristics. I was born and raised on the east side, so Nazareth College is very close to me. You know, I've seen it in my weekly travels, whether it was to Myers or Walmart or to Speedway gas station. I mean, whatever it is, you know, having that space and seeing that space, you know, it means a lot to me. So I think that's a part of it. Then on the flip side, being pro-business, I want to remove all barriers and hardships for those who own their own land. And, you know, had this been in place, or had we been more proactive, then I'm not sure what the outcome would be. But trust me, you know, these are the type of things I pray over, because I don't, and I can honestly say for each commissioner and mayor and vice mayor up here, you know, we're torn in this space. And it's our responsibility at the end of the day to make a decision on the best path forward. And I guess I get a little more frustration, and I'm just voicing my opinion. I get a little more frustration when individuals take a stance of I'm right and you're wrong. Because at the end of the day, this isn't a right or wrong. This is just how do we figure out what's the best path and how do we do the best we can with what we have. For those who know Bishop Davis, that's one of his signature statements, doing the best I can with what I got. And I guess as much as I hate to take a stance with the Historic Commission, and I'm not saying that I'm one way or the other, but I do believe in the process and allowing the process to carry out. And it's to my knowledge that it will still eventually come back to us. But then on the flip side, you know, if it was individuals who if I felt like the individuals who were in control of these properties did not have the resources to maintain, then that's another story, that another thing that needs to be considered. And I don't know, I guess it just goes back to there's no right or wrong. It is our job to do what's best for the community. Every individual up here, you know, I agree with on each stance because it all needs to be taken into consideration. When we make decisions, we don't make decisions based upon you know, one thing or another. We make it based upon 70 plus thousand citizens in our community. And I think that has to be taken into consideration, for which I know a lot of you already are, in regards to my colleagues and you guys making a decision moving forward. I guess in these moments, I say I'm honored to serve with you. And in this vote, you know, I don't know which way it'll turn, but I personally will look for the process to continue as is. And man, I'm just torn on both ends.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank the sisters for the incredible service you have given to this community. Amazing, the things that you have done for so many years. This community could never repay you for what you've done. And Pastor Dannison said before,
please.
Pastor Dannison said before that church is not a building. Church is people. And the service that the people from the First Congregational Church have given this community is incredible. And it is astounding to me that after all that service, people can come and say to the sisters and say to the people of the First Congregational Church, you know that land that you've been taking care of all these years and have used for the good of this community, we're going to take care of that for you now. You're not going to have any say in what happens with that land. We're going to be in charge of that. That is astounding to me, and I cannot go along with that at all. There is no question that the people who own that property want this process to stop. No question. Second thing is, we've heard a lot tonight about process and how important it is to let the process go forward. This process is flawed from the beginning. The people that own the property were not included in the discussion. The people of the community were not included in the discussion. The city commission was not included in the discussion. What has happened is a fait accompli has come and put on the table and saying, okay, now here's where we are. Let's let this keep going. The other thing I want to say about the process is this process is not neutral. If this continues on, as long as it continues on, it's costing. It's costing the First Congregational Church in their ability to fundraise and do what they want to do with that property for the kids of this city. It's costing the sisters money, lots of money, that they want to use for the poorest people in this community. So I say it's time to end this. It's time to let First Congregational Church do what they want to do for the kids of this city. It's time to let the sisters have control over their land and do what they want to do for the people of this community who need them so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments? Commissioner Anderson?
I have a couple questions for the city attorney, I believe, and maybe for our staff, who I know we have a staff person here who's does the work of the Historic District Commission. So, as it stands, Attorney Robinson, and as this is a duly constituted commission that we empower to do certain work, can we tell that commission, you may do this, you may not do this? I mean, can we take those actions, and must the commission respond accordingly to those actions?
In my opinion, given the unique nature of the Historic Preservation Commission, you may. They are
Can you
not-
describe why? What is the unique nature?
Unlike the Zoning Board of Appeals, unlike the Planning Commission, they're set forth in state law. And they're accounted for, and then there's a process in which how you, as a city commission, interact with those bodies, to name two. However, the Historic Preservation Commission is not a creature of state law. The Historic District Commission is, and that you would have a little more difficult time in expressing your desire and telling them how they should go about their business, because that's set in state law as to how the Historic District Commission. And I want to step back, and I apologize if I'm telling you something you already know, but there's two bodies that the City Commission has empowered to act on historic matters. The first one, Historic Preservation Commission, is kind of given a general, is created by ordinance. There is no state law analog for his Historic District Commission. There is, I'm sorry, for Historic Preservation Commission.
Right.
There is a requirement, if you're going to create a historic district, for the commission to appoint a study committee for that district. And what the City of Kalamazoo has done, as I indicated earlier this evening, you've said, we're going to have a standing study committee, the Historic Preservation Commission. The Historic District Commission is, if there is a historic district created and somebody wants to do work on the exterior of their building that exists, either whether it's historic or non-historic, but if they're in the district and they want to do exterior work, as work is defined by the statute, then they have to go to the Historic District Commission and get a certificate of appropriateness for them to, for that individual or owner to proceed with exterior work on that building. So, in that regard, the Historic Preservation Commission is your creation. You can, if you choose, you could get rid of it tomorrow, or at least in 2 meetings, because it's created by ordinances. You could say, we're going to disband it and get rid of it, and that's not the way we're going to approach historic districts going forward in the future. As a result, and there is some state law that the Michigan Court of Appeals said the historic district provision, the historic district process is in the control of the governing body. And in this case, since the creation is really in your control, you have more control over the Historic Preservation Commission in that process. So that's a long way of explaining it, but those are the differences.
I appreciate that. That's helpful. And I know we've sometimes used those terms even interchangeably here when we're talking about Historic District Commission, Historic Preservation Commission. So it's very clear that we have the absolute power. There's no state statute governing our interaction. This is something that we have control over, the activities of the Historic Preservation Commission that we have created by ordinance. Okay. Now, another question, and I don't want to belabor this at all, but there's been discussion about process. So I'm just wondering if just a real short description of it, if that's possible. Ultimately, what is this process we're talking about? And I mean, when we talk about process, and some folks are saying, well, I think we can do it 4 months, or I'm hoping we can do it 1 month, or can we get it done in a week? What is the actual process and the timeframes related to the process we're describing?
Well, under state law, if you may create a historic district only by ordinance, and the first step would be to create or appoint an historic district study committee. Now, you've done that through the Standing Historic Preservation Committee. They're the Standing Historic Study Committee, and they're charged with, if they think there is an area in town that is ripe for a historic district designation, they undertake that work. And the work is laid out in the statute as to what they must do. Primarily, it is they have to follow the guidelines and selection evaluation criteria by the United States Secretary of the Interior for inclusion of resources in a district. So they have to follow basically federal rules in order to figure out, are the resources in the district significant enough to create a historic district? And then they create a preliminary report. And that, up to that point, that's been done so far for both the two proposed districts. The next step is to transmit that report to the 3 state bodies that I referenced earlier and the City Planning Commission. Once that transmission occurs, then there has to be a public hearing not less than 60 days after that transmission. So basically, 2 months later, you have to wait, and then you have a public hearing on the preliminary report. Once you have that public hearing, then the Historic District, the Historic Preservation Committee and the City Commission have up to 1 year to consider whether the historic district should be created. And what happens is there is a final report that is transmitted to the Planning Commission. If the recommendation is no historic district, it stops right there. If the request or the recommendation is to create a historic district, then the recommendation goes to the Planning Commission. There has to be a proposed ordinance associated with that, and then it comes to this body where you can, in response to the final report, you can create an historic district or say no to it. Now, in addition, and I don't want to make it any more complicated, but that's the process. So no historic district is created until such time as you follow those steps and this body acts to either accept or reject that idea. In the interim, and this was added in 1992, because there was concern that while you're studying this for up to a year, there could be a lot of work going on in historic districts and people tearing down buildings or significantly changing the exterior so as to lose their historic significance. And so what the legislature said is, legislative body, city commission, you have 2 options available to you. If you feel that there's going to be irreparable harm, you can do an emergency 6-month moratorium that basically says no exterior work while we're considering this, and you can extend that for another 6 months. So remember I talked about you have up to a year to make that decision? You can basically say nothing happens in these districts until we decide whether we're going to have a historic district or not. The other option is to say we're going to treat it as kind of a temporary historic district, and so again, so that people don't change the character, you have to go, if you are proposing exterior work on a building in a proposed district, you have to go through the Historic District Commission and get that certificate of appropriateness. And that, again, you have up to a year, you can do that. But again, that's your call. As things stand now, there is no request before this commission to do either one of those 2 activities. And the process of whether you're going to have a historic district or not in these 2 areas could continue. People could be demolishing buildings while that process is going on. And so at the end of it's possible that at the end of a year or less, because you don't have to take a full year, you could create a historic district, but it might be vacant property out at Nazareth Road, and it might be absent 2 buildings here downtown. that would still, you still could create a historic district for the remaining resources. With that, and if I've missed anything, I will defer to the real expert, Ms. Ferraro.
Only if you missed something.
I just wanted to put a little bit of a timeline on that. One of the 3 boards that we need the comment from at the state level only meets 3 times a year. So if we needed to transmit the report to them and get a report quickly, it would need to be within the next 10 days. And then we could possibly have this entire issue resolved sometime in July, based on it would go through the entire normal process of potentially becoming a historic district by having the Planning Commission and those 3 bodies comment 60 days, and then 60 days after those reports are transmitted, we have the public hearing, integrate all the comments from the public hearing, and it could be to the City Commission in July. And have completed the process as outlined in ordinance.
That does get to kind of, I hope it's a final question I was going to ask about process, is that we are obviously dependent on the other entities and how quickly they work as it relates to that. So you're suggesting that they, in essence, they work very quickly. That's not been my experience working with state agencies, that things seem to flow quickly through bureaucratic processes, but you're suggesting all moves quickly. That's how, you're pretty confident about that?
I'm having interned in the State Preservation Office and worked with them on and off of it with projects for the past 25 years. I think that in this case, we probably would get a very timely response where we would have their comments before the public hearing happened, 60 days or a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thank you. You might want to stay. So for the attorney and for Manager Ferraro here, there were some statements made about procedures not being followed, certain requirements that were required. I guess I didn't hear you talk about that, and I guess I need some clarification on what the procedures are to do this work. I'm going to continue with all my questions to get them out. How long has this study been going on? When is the study, I got more, when is the study due to be delivered? And am I clear that there hasn't been a study provided to us thus far? There has not been a request, and correct me if I'm wrong, for a moratorium or any request that we've received from the commission as of yet. And then I think those are my questions.
Excuse me. The study has been ongoing fairly heavily for a little bit under a year for both Bronson Park and for Nazareth. There's been concerns about Nazareth. At the very beginning, they said they were actively looking for partners to take over the buildings and to take them off their hands. And so at that point in time, the commission wasn't especially concerned because it looked very promising. When First Congregational took ownership of First Reformed Church, the idea was that it was going to become an innovation center, an entrepreneur incubator. And they came to the commission and talked to them about almost exactly 2 years ago, and the commission wrote a letter in very strong support of this possible use for the building at 302 Academy. So and then when things started changing from we're working with someone to reuse these buildings to we have other plans for the places and we want to demolish them and remove them, that was when the Historic Preservation Commission, working as the study committee, became very interested in possibly establishing a historic district, because it's the only tool available in the state of Michigan for a city to state, we want you to hold off, we want something else to happen, we would like these buildings to be considered for reuse again. Because it was the only tool that's available. So the study was done. We completed, the Nazareth study was completed in December, and the Bronson Park study was completed and approved by the Preservation Commission in January. Both of those were completed and were presented to all the property owners. Were invited to an open meeting here in this room on the 26th of February. We had 61 people sign in. I think there were more because the room was almost completely full. So we have, that's the first step. We haven't gone beyond that. There has been no request. The Preservation Commission has voted in favor of asking for a resolution for the temporary historic district or for the moratorium, but that has not been transmitted to the City Commission as an official request yet. They have just made that decision within that body, nor have they transmitted any of the reports to any of the bodies that need to look at them before the process can move forward. The Planning Commission has not received it yet, nor have the three state committees that need to see it.
And so if they've taken an action on a request for a temporary, they took the action, why was that not transmitted?
Because we were in the middle of these, we didn't want, the commission did not want to do that until until more was known. We had the impression that all the commissioners had from the meeting on February 26th was that there was a lot of room for education that needed to happen and for working with people that needed to happen, and they did not want to begin that process right away. We wanted to give it more time for discussions and for communication. And we had a meeting with all the Bronson Park property owners on the 11th of March at Ladies Library to talk about it. And then we had a meeting with all the representatives of Nazareth at the Community Foundation on the 14th. We wanted to get the communication and see if we could get other things working out before the Preservation Commission would ask for that resolution from the City Commission. And so they have not asked for that. They're meeting again on the 9th.
Mr. Attorney, my question regarding some of the statements that Pastor made regarding what should have happened, I guess what does the law say what should have happened? I'm not clear necessarily unless what you were stating earlier is the only thing it says about process.
What the statute says as to who should serve, now while there may be some guidance that here's what you should do, the statute is clear. A study committee shall contain a majority of persons who have a clearly demonstrated interest in or knowledge of historic preservation and shall contain representation from one or more duly organized local historic preservation organizations, period. So that's all the requirements are to put somebody on an historic district. The Historic Preservation Commission meets those qualifications. So that's the state law as to who has to be. Now, while it may be advisable or a good idea to put somebody on who owns property in the district, there is no requirement to do so.
What Pastor Dennison was talking about is processes the State Historic Preservation Office recommends that municipalities use in working on a historic district, a proposed historic district. In Kalamazoo, that education phase, by and large, has taken place after the report is done, so there's something to discuss. Because the report, the Historic District Study Report, the idea of that is that you evaluate using objective criteria whether there is a potential historic district there or not. There's a couple places that the commission has studied that they said, no, there's not a viable district here anymore. So they didn't go any further with that. So until you have something to discuss, there's nothing to educate about. And so the Historic Preservation Commission, working as the study committee, has used that time period after the report is complete to work on education and pulling people in, getting opinions. That's why it's called a preliminary study committee report, which is all that has been put together so far. Until all the comments are in from all the bodies and from the public at the public hearing, it's not a complete report. And that's what the City Commission will see at the end, is that complete report with the comments from everybody who attends the meetings and the hearings, and from any other comments that we get via email or postal service or anything else. So that final report will of course, the study committee report itself recommends that it be a historic district because it's a historic study, and that's the charge of the Preservation Commission. The other comments come in and counterbalance that and give the City Commission something to consider with the comments from other bodies.
So we've chosen not to follow the state recommendations in this community, so we did that with West Main and Vine and Stewart.
I can't speak to Vine. I was not here for Vine. I didn't move back to Kalamazoo until 1987. It was founded in 90. But for the addition in 1997 of the northwest quadrant of the Vine neighborhood, and I believe that's also when Old Orchard and Allen Boulevard were added to the Stewart district, we did follow that process. We the study committee report was completed, and then we engaged the public to talk about it. Same thing we did for West Main Hill, same thing we did for the Haymarket edition of the 100 block of East Michigan. So report's done, then we engage the public.
All right, so, Commissioners, I'm still on my time, but if someone has a question for Ms. Rao, go ahead and dive in, but I'm going to finish mine. No? Okay. I didn't know. I read nonverbals, I wasn't sure. Thank you for your time. So my thinking is similar to, you can be seated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So my history of sitting up here has been the process through our advisory boards, through Zoning Board of Appeals, Planning Commission, Charter Review. I guess I just was a advisory board junkie in some ways. Since we're fully disclosing some things, I consider pastor to be my pastor. I'm not a member of the church, but my pastor, my confidant, and somebody that I believe in a whole heck of a lot. For full disclosure, I worked with a number of the sisters and loved them very, very much. And so I have a bias towards my sisters, not being a Catholic, but hey, everybody needs a sister or two in their life. And also for full disclosure, Pastor asked me to sit with a group way back when. I wasn't good at attending, I think, but to talk about the playscape and the opportunities probably 3-ish years ago, 2-ish, at least 2 or 3. So I understood that there certainly could and might be a playscape at that location. I also believed and always believed that when you talk about historic buildings that this is what happens every single time, and I think it should happen. Going back to my thinking around our advisory committees and my history with them, and we talk about process, and someone mentioned it, we mentioned process at the beginning of this meeting about how something gets out there, and that's important that, you know, we make sure we follow what we routinely do. That's an interesting statement as we're dealing with this. I'm also fearful of what's going on with the overlay zone, that we're costing those folks money, and that's okay, but not in this case. I want all of those opportunities, and Commissioner, your microphone is on, so someone may be hearing side comments. I just want to make sure we know that. I don't know whether the building should stay or should come down. For me, it's a different question tonight. For me, it is a question of how do we respect and how do we work with our advisory boards. It truly is. Us diving in and directing an advisory board, this is almost unprecedented. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but almost unprecedented. That gives me no comfort whatsoever. I don't like the thought of the sisters having to spend $80,000 a month or pastor not being able to raise the dollars or what have you. But the reason we have these boards, as I looked at what this, specifically this board's to do, is to explore historic districts. I question our process of how that's happened, though. So I'm in agreement with that. But I also know a report is coming 8 days from now. 8 days from now. So for me, I would request that instead of us directing them not to do, we direct them to do, and they do it by April 30th, and we get the report. It doesn't go to Planning Commission, it doesn't go to the state, it comes to this body, and you decide. So that's the process tweak I would make, so that you decide we're not going to submit this or we are going to submit it. That's what I would prefer. I don't get to make motions. I mentioned that to you last time. So one of these folks would have to take that. But that's what I would like. If we don't get to that spot, I'm going to vote no in this resolution. Not because I don't want the sisters to move forward, not because I don't want the church to move forward or the KIA. I just think this is not good policy to dive in to an issue that is in the scope of the Historic Preservation Commission. Doesn't mean I agree with it. I understand. I don't want to keep a building that I have to pay $80,000 for either. I love the Mother House. I love everything that's at Nazareth, but I don't own it, and that's my struggle. I agree with everybody up here. It's easy to say someone should keep something or do something or whatever when you don't own it and don't have the responsibility. But what I don't want to do is truncate the process of the Historic Preservation Commission. I agree with Mr. Parzak on that, and I sat on the Planning Commission. I had a city manager and a city commissioner that attempted to do that to me once on a committee, and I'm going, well, why am I here? Why did I serve? Because apparently, no matter what I say, it doesn't really matter. You have plans other than what I think. That's what I would prefer. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a clarifying question based upon your statements.
Sure.
And Ms. Ferraro, you might have to come back for this. Am I correct in that this study must be turned in within 10 days to get it turned around in July?
And yeah, there's things I learned tonight. I forgot that point. That's
Let me clarify that. The State Historic Preservation Review Board meets only 3 times a year. They meet in early May, late September, and early January. They are one of the bodies that needs to comment. We need to transmit it to them. I don't believe we have to wait for their comments to move forward after that, but we need to transmit it to them. That's why I say within 10 days. We need to get it to them within 10 days because that's about where their deadline is for accepting anything to be reviewed at the meeting in early May. So that's where that deadline comes from. Okay.
Thank you. That's all the questions that I would have. I will pose to you, Mayor, on your thoughts versus it coming back to us that this study is submitted with the expectation of being done within that 10-day period that needs to be done.
Thank you. Commissioner Sykes?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a thought that I had in hearing from all of you, just real quick, and that is, I want to. So this is tricky for me, and I spoke with Commissioner Cunningham earlier today about, not circumventing the work of our commissions and how vitally important that is, and, we heard a lot of comments on that tonight. I would respectfully submit that I think the precedent for this is actually already set. And in hearing some of the comments, I was reminded, I can't remember which one of my colleagues reminded me of this, but, we've asked our own city staff to stop moving forward with certain efforts, even though, they are charged with exploring and doing certain work, because the process did not include the community and the residents and the business owners from the beginning. That's not because that's a legal requirement. That's because this body's value system has been that we don't make decisions for areas and districts without the input of the residents and the owners. We just don't do that. And so I do think there is precedent that has been set where this commission body has said, you know what, with all due respect to your work, we appreciate everything you put in, and we are telling you that this needs to stop here, and you need to go back to the drawing board because it is the best way to serve our entire community. So that's one thought I have. Another thing that's interesting to me, and the only thing that actually brought this to mind for me, is all of the talk about, well, these things could be used for affordable housing. I'm gonna push back on that a little bit and say I don't think we're being honest. We have talked as a body many times about how expensive it is to do affordable housing developments and the fact that there's not a lot of profit in that. And so it is hard to encourage developers to do those types of developments. I would suggest that any building that is going to take millions of dollars just to be viable as a building is not one that affordable housing developers are going to use. But the other thought that I had in that is that we also have not been in the business on this commission of ever telling private property owners what they can do with their businesses, what they can do with their developments, what they can do with their land. As a matter of fact, that's been one of the arguments against requiring developers to do certain things to provide us with more affordable housing or community benefits agreements. Thus far, we have not set those requirements because we understand that that's not our role. So For what it's worth, I want to be clear, I know where I stand on this, and that is that I believe that we need to stop holding folks hostage with their plans to move forward. I offer those just for what they're worth to the larger conversation. I'm also not in favor, I mean, if we're talking about protecting areas, I'm not in favor of removing the protections that are already currently there for a church square. I think that would be a mistake. But yeah, I don't know, if we feel comfortable enough to say to our staff who does this work day in and day out, all day long, and they work really hard and they're really good at what they do, and we can still say, yo, sorry, you gotta start back over because we didn't include the entire community in this. I don't know that I agree with the idea that we can't do the same with one of our commission boards.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just for clarity, I said I don't know when we have set that precedent or not. I differentiate our staff from these volunteer committees that we put in place. In regards to them, that's not been our typical practice. I think these folks that work for us are our employees that understand that you get into city government work, you get into this work to move a city and do certain things, you're going to be directed by the bosses. We can certainly say we're the bosses of committees because we place them. Don't disagree with that. This body happens to be appointed by me, approved by you. So those members serve at my pleasure along with your approval. So I get it. I just think this is a little different than that. Doesn't mean I'm right, just how I feel about it. And you know, I think through zoning, we often do tell private folks what they can do. We do, even with our district. These districts that I live in, we're telling private folks who own whatever, there's things you can't do. So there is a precedent that we have set. And if you think about what we did with the overlay district just a few weeks ago, no, a few months ago now, hey, you're not going to develop on your property, even though it's zoned right, you're not going to do that. You're going to hold for 6 months because we have folks that are concerned about what you may put there on your own private property. So I hear you. Commissioner Urban?
Mayor, I wanted to clear up with something here regarding public involvement. We heard our staff person on the historic processes of Kalamazoo, Sharon Ferraro, say that the practice has been for the study report to be prepared before there's a lot of public input, because the study report that they have now prepared, that's done, now provides us with information. It provides everybody with information to make an informed decision. So it's not like we have excluded people. We have delayed from being involved. We've delayed their introduction to all this until that study report was complete. Now it's possible for people to make informed decisions based on what's in that report, plus their own experience, plus their own interests and everything else. So I don't think we have not made the mistake yet of excluding people from being actively involved in the process. We can begin doing that as soon as practically right away. So that's just my small correction. Just to complete my thought, because I see your fingers raised, that what we could do here basically is, if we vote for this resolution as it stands, we're done. We will have committed the city to setting a precedent that I'm troubled about. If we vote the resolution as proposed down, then we have the opportunity to take these two cases up separately and vote on them, and the outcome might be different. So I just want to remind you of what the options are, and I'm prepared to go ahead and have a vote anytime the rest of you are ready.
Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe it was 1980, just around the time you were being born, I think, right around there. We used to have a community relations board. And the community relations board recommended to the city commission that we divest from South Africa. And the city commission did not divest from South Africa. So our proposal was rejected.
Yeah, I'm not, so we don't have a proposal. That's my point. The commission, that board did their work and came to a conclusion. It came to the body that makes a decision, which that's what I've asked for. We're the body that can make a decision. We can truncate. I'm okay with the process of no planning commission, nothing goes to the state. We make the decision. I'm good with that. So, Commissioner, I support what the Community Relations Board did and what you did. Bring it on. HPC, bring it on. And we take it up on the 18th, and then you can vote your hearts out. So I'm in total agreement with that statement right there. Commissioner Cunningham.
I guess to go back to, you know, in my daily job, I look for process improvement. With this particular situation, I just want to provide an opportunity to say, you know, I know the Historic Commission has a committee who comes together and performs this study, and it appears that the state does not have any requirement to provide citizen input until the study is brought and then the educational component. What I would add into that as a potential process improvement is, although they are the experts in the historical district study, putting that process or project together, I would also include ensuring that the stakeholders of the potential district are contacted and included in that process of the study being created. Not that it has to be a citywide conversation, but I definitely think it is something that we can add into that process. Now, I am ignorant to what that process is, and I'm not sure what that includes. So what I may be saying to them may be falling upon deaf ears, as they are more experts in that field. But I think that just the outside looking in, that could be a process improvement.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sykes? Vice Mayor?
I just have a comment for all of us and then a clarification question for the mayor. My comment for all of you is, would we feel differently if Plaza Corp and Catalyst Company had spoke more, harder in their stance tonight? I had phone calls with both Patty Owens and Ken Nachi. I know their stance on this, and they didn't offer up those comments tonight. Would we feel differently if we heard from the for-profit entities that are driving redevelopment in our downtown? But instead, we've heard from the churches, the nonprofit, the KIA, their attorneys, the sisters, etc. So I challenge you to think about that. And to Mr. Mayor, you've said a couple of dates now. You've talked about the 30th, and then you said the 18th. I'm assuming the 18th you meant the 15th. But I just want some clarification, because I'm smart, I'm reading the body language, I'm kind of seeing where this might go, and I want to know what's going to happen if we go that route. Will a decision, a hard decision, be on the 15th? Do we have to submit this report? Can we, in our authority, say no planning commission, no state? Because I don't want any surprises after tonight, find out, oh wait, actually, we don't have that authority, and it's going to have to go before these bodies.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. I clarified the options to do that with the city attorney, and we do have that authority. Just like it was explained to all of us, you've got absolute authority over this board. We could end them tonight. Could, if we wanted to. Jeff would not be happy with us, but we could do that tonight. You could take that action right now. So directing them, this resolution is not doing anything different than saying, it doesn't go anywhere other than to us first, and we can decide what to do with it. So that is an option. The 15th, 18th, 15th, somehow I got this thing in my head. The 15th would be our next meeting. The HPC, Historic Preservation Commission, meets on the 9th. I think that's when they're delivering the study, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yes, it could be on your agenda on the 15th. The reason I went April 30th was, my thinking was that it not come back to the next meeting, that we give them 30 days to resolve this, do all the engagement and whatever, and on that first meeting in May, we should have a report that says such and such. I didn't know at the time when I mentioned April 30th that their report was ready to deliver, which I find that kind of interesting that we didn't know that, you know, that is one of those nuances. So for the Historic Preservation Commission, I think you guys got to adjust some of the things that you do and how you do it. You need to take this as a learning opportunity as well. No matter how this comes out tonight, there's some tweaks that need to happen with this process and system. But as it exists now, that's where I stand. Are there any more?
I just want to say one more thing, and I apologize because I know we're sort of dragging this out. I want to definitely clarify and appreciate your comments, Mayor, following my comments because they were helpful. And I want to just clarify in light of the correction made. So when I say that, you know, our value on this commission has been that you start with community engagement before you make decisions. I guess that's maybe not the right thing to say. So and I've brought this up in the past. I still remember 2014, the first time I met Director Kick. And it was as an activist and an organizer, and it was to sit in the office with her and Director Lamb and talk about how efforts to move things forward in our city should start with community engagement before anything else. And so I would argue it should even start with community engagement before the study. I have a personal opposition to, well, we're gonna do the study, we'll have all the information, and then we'll educate you, right? As if it feels a little paternalistic to me in that, see, I am the expert. And once I figure out what my plan is, then I'm going to come tell you, and you can decide how you feel about it. And I don't say that to minimize or be rude about it. I really genuinely don't. On the flip side, what you can do is you can say, hey, you know, we were thinking about this. We're really concerned about preserving these buildings. We'd love to sit down and talk about this. We were thinking about doing a study. What are your thoughts on it? How can we work together on this? How can we make it so that my efforts and your efforts coincide? As a best practice in just community building, that feels like what needs to happen to me every time. Right? And so, you know, we had that conversation. We have watched these things play out. You know, our staff has taken that direction to heart. We have had these conversations up here as a commission, and we have asked our staff to do things that way as best as they can. And so what I was suggesting is, I think that is also something that should apply to our commissions and our boards as a best practice. And to your point, Mayor Hopewell, hopefully this is a learning experience where the next time something like this comes up, we do that first. Because there is a way to get through these processes in a less hostile manner. There really is. But it involves starting from the very, 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 very beginning. And so, yeah, I just want to share that. I do have a question, because I know we're getting close to a vote up here. Reading body language and all of those good things, right? I understand there are a couple of different ways that folks would like to present this resolution in order to get something passed. What I would like to ask is if it is possible to start with voting on the resolution as written and then coming back with, okay, if that's not what we want to do, then can we write it this way? Which is maybe, Mayor, you know, to your point, we come back on this date. The report is finished, and so we should be able to get that and make a decision at our next meeting, right? And the reason I ask that is more so because I like to have votes on record. I like to have the resolution lifted up. Let's take the vote. Let's have folks' votes on record, and then let's go forward. If that doesn't pass and we're gonna change it and we're gonna do something else after the fact, let's do that. But let's go ahead and exhaust all of those options would be my preference in this.
Yeah, Thank you, Commissioner. Based on the motion, that's what would occur. There's not been a substitute motion offered, and so we would move forward in that manner. If it fails, then you have to, well, if it fails, then you have the option of having the Historic Preservation Commission continue their work, or an alternative motion provided. Commissioner?
I thought I would just save my remarks for Commissioner's time.
Okay.
Then let us move on, because what I was going to say won't really change the vote. But we are having teachable moments here for all of us, I think.
Yeah, I'm ready to call for a roll call here if we can do that, and we'll see where it lands. Is that okay, Commissioner?
One quick little
Go ahead.
question. Is citizen input in the affected district included in the report, or is that something tangential?
I think that we heard the coordinator say you have to have that when it comes forward. Is that not correct?
No, well, it happens after the preliminary report is published or transmitted. The preliminary report is a very technical report, both in terms of what's outlined in the statute, in terms of you're looking at certain criteria. For instance, now I won't belabor it, but we're talking about churches. And so one of the things you look at is the Secretary of Interior's criteria. And a church is considered of deriving primary, a religious property deriving primary significance from architectural or artistic distinction or historical importance. That's what you're looking for. So you say, oh, is that building representative of these things under the Secretary of Interior's guidelines? You don't, and it's not a question of does it cost this much to preserve it. It's the question is, does that building meet this criteria? It's a very technical report. Once that technical report is published, then you get the public input in terms of that may all be true, but it's falling down on the roof is collapsing and it's going to cost a lot of money to preserve it. Please don't make this a historic district. That's when that dialogue begins.
However, in this case, the body that does the study is the Historic Preservation Commission, and they are a public body that has to notice and hold their hearings in public. So they can't do that work outside of community input. I mean, they're no different than us in regards to them having to take public comment and have the conversation. It's not the same as having workshops and what have you, but they have to do the public side of holding their meetings. So, yeah.
I know you want to call a question, but I guess I haven't really sort of expressed my opinions on this, so I just want to take a moment to do it. Just a couple quick things. First of all, I mean, I know it's been a long conversation tonight, but it's a big community value, so it's worth a long conversation.
Absolutely.
Two, I feel like I'm in a situation where we are weighing competing goods in certain ways. There's a community caring and good that comes out of the idea of preservation, and there's a community good that we're talking about, you know, the good work, the people work, I guess I'll say, that a lot of folks have done who happen to be associated with these buildings. So it's really kind of a competing goods, you know, kind of a conversation here as you begin to weigh that good, that value, which I guess when you think about it in some ways, I don't know, seems somewhat less clear-cut, but I still get it if you're talking about natural features protection. You know, is that a competing good to develop? Well, it provides tax benefit, but then you're preserving a natural feature. So in this case, it seems like we're a little closer in trying to compare those things. One other thing is that, I mean, I do really, it's some conversations, I spend a great deal of time talking, drives some people crazy sometimes, and some conversations I listen more, and I feel like I've been learning by listening tonight. I feel like I'm sitting here with a smart group of people who are trying to be very thoughtful about this, and that is informing me. And the last thing I want to say about it is, I did have an inclination to say, okay, if this report's coming in, and if it's due or it's going to be presented in 9 days or whatever, get the report in, get it back to us on the 15th. We'll have the report, and we can make make a decision then. We'll try to speed it up as far as that goes. That's my inclination thinking about this. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if anyone's going to feel any differently, about it 2 weeks from tonight. So is what we're doing, kind of just postponing the inevitable by going through that process? I don't know if anything's going to happen that would change that.
Thank you, Commissioner. As I said before, there has not been a change to the motion. So if we move the motion, we'll know what happens. And so, Clerk Moss, roll call, please.
Commissioner Urban?
No.
Vice Mayor Knott?
Yes.
Mayor Hopewell?
No.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham?
No.
Commissioner Sykes?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. Motion's carried. We are now on citizens' comments on anything this evening. Please step to the podium. You'll have 4 minutes. Give us your name and whether you live within the city. Good evening, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Jody Dozeman. I live in the city. I've been addressing the issue at Stadium Drive Apartments. I was on the bus, it was shortly after this meeting, and one of the men that lived at Stadium Drive was telling me and remembering about his wife, girlfriend wife, being pushed out of her roller by this married lady who invaded my door, who's pushed me, who had my TV that I had permission, and Judy is seen right on the guy called her from Interact and said it was my TV. They still kept it in their house. I mean, this lady's been known to push other people, grab stuff out of my hands, and just move on. And she hasn't been evicted. She's been able to stay there, but boy, when I have this incident where she's pushing me on the elevator and I respond to it, they evicted me. So I end up in this homeless situation, and I'm just wondering, how is it she got away with so many times of doing that? Had she have been taken care of on her first time, I wouldn't be homeless. And I'm wondering how many people that didn't know how to utilize the rules and what to do properly got evicted and were homeless, besides others who moved out. So I'm like thinking the Gymnastics Association, where many of them got together, how would it be to get the people at Stadium Drive Apartments together to write their stories and say the problems they had there? I've had 5 people on my phone recorded as doors unlocked. One lady's door was unlocked 7 times in 1 month, and I am wondering how those cameras did not show that. And there were times I checked the cameras, and the cameras did show that there were people up and down the hall. So there were times that it didn't show somebody unlocking the door, yet the doors are unlocked. This is what I addressed at the last city commission. There's a lot of things going on at that apartment complex. I don't know where to begin really to say what. How would I gather these people to prove that something was going on beyond them, cameras being shown? I can write up some stuff if I can get some energy. This medicine just tears me up that they want me on. It gives me a bad attitude. It makes me extremely sleepy. So I would like to be able to be awake through criminal activity and be able to do something decent, not be kicked to the curb and considered all this stuff. It's very difficult. So I'm thinking of class action against First Housing. And when I was at KVCC, my computer and stuff would blank out. When I was at KVC, at my apartment complex, but when I was at KVCC, I had everything typed out. When I got there, after checking at my apartment and double checking because of the troubles I have, so I'm aware, I lost a whole paragraph at KVCC. Now, some of the people have been really good and said, bail out, seems you're having troubles at home, and come back when you can do better. So I've had troubles at KVCC with my computers and my papers not going over and my grades got lower. So I did bail. Thank goodness I had that opportunity. So I've had troubles at KVCC. First Housing's been told by I don't know how many times and many people that their cameras aren't working and people are being invaded. I had stuff missing. My checkbook ended up taken right out of the
Thank you, ma'am. Your time has expired. Good evening.
Jeff Messer, city resident. Tomorrow is Mayor Hopewell's birthday, so I'd like to wish him a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Bobby.
Oh, I can say thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I always
Well,
say
that's
thank
it.
you. Anyone else wanting to address the commission this evening? Seeing no one, we're at commissioners' comments. Commissioner Sykes.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so it seems as if the folks that I offended at our last meeting or prior to our last meeting have left, and yet I am going to go ahead and take a quick moment to further address the comments because I do believe in teachable moments. So I hear the frustration that I often up here on this dais will talk about white privilege, and I will talk about the fact that our heritage, European heritage in this country is not always something to be proud of. I stand by that as a descendant of people who were both oppressive and also people who were oppressed. I feel fully within my wheelhouse and right to name that there have been horrific things done in the name of colonization and manifest destiny in this country that harmed huge amounts of people. And lifting that up and talking about that is not an example of oppression. Making somebody feel uncomfortable with my words on race is not an example of oppression. So for anybody who feels as if I make comments on race in order to attack folks who are white, and I want to say this, I believe that whiteness is a social construct. I am part Dutch, right? Other folks are part Irish. We all have ethnicities and nationalities. But, you know, it is what it is. We have this concept of whiteness in this country. When I talk about that, and I talk about white privilege and white supremacy and all of these things, I am talking about systems. It is not meant to be a personal attack. I don't go visit my mother and personally attack her because her skin is white. I don't personally attack her because she's Dutch. I could sit up here and talk all night about the beautiful, amazing things, the legacy that my Dutch grandparents left on this community, the social activism that I learned from them.
Commissioner, I don't want to stop you, but
Yeah.
you might want to pull back.
Thank you. Echoing, thank you. It's not meant to attack. It's meant to educate and invite everybody in our community to do better on these issues. We have a lot of movement that needs to be had. There's a lot of moving forward that needs to be had. There's a lot of healing that needs to be had. There's a lot of accounting for trauma that needs to be done, and you don't get there if you don't talk about it. So my sincerest apologies. One other thing I want to share about my Dutch ancestors, because this is something that brings me great joy, just to give you some concept of where I'm coming from. You may not be aware, but the Dutch people are one of the few folks who immigrated here from Europe, who came not to escape intolerance. My ancestors came to escape tolerance. My ancestors felt that their home country was getting too tolerant of new people and new faces and other races and other religions, and they came here to escape that. Now, I say that to share with you that I also get a great deal of pride and satisfaction from that, in knowing that somebody like me, who has dedicated my life, my life revolves around righting some of these injustices, can come from those people. I think that is a beautiful thing. And so never do I intend to attack folks for being white, but I will always lift up and call out problematic thinking that does not move us forward in a way that honors all people in our community, including the people of color who have suffered genocide at the hands of my ancestors. Now, that was super heavy. I'm going to move on from that. Say happy birthday, Mayor Hopewell. And I also want to wish a very happy birthday to Mr. and Mrs. Sykes, Tommy Sykes Sr., Catherine Sykes, a couple who have been in our community for a very long time. Mr. Sykes was actually the owner of the very first garbage company, not the first black-owned garbage company, but the first garbage company in this city. And they have both, in the last couple months, turned 90 and 80. And still going, still as active as I don't know what. I still see the red truck, the red pickup truck out and about. They celebrated their birthday. Their children threw a surprise party for them on Saturday, and I had the pleasure of attending with my children, and so I just want to wish a very happy birthday to those folks as they may be watching. Yeah, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Cooney, Commissioner Urban.
Thank you, Mayor Hopewell. In a way, we've got some clarity, but really nothing that's disastrous has happened this evening. Everything can still, the future is still open to us in a large degree, especially with regard to downtown. I really think there's some misunderstandings there that we have a chance to repair. I'm hoping that the people on the Historic District Commission and the people surrounding Bronson Park who own property can take a deep breath and commit to having collegial discussions on how to proceed from here on. My hope is that that the Historic Preservation Committee, its members and staff, and the people connected with the First Congregational Church and the KIA and others will work to preserve history in the course of building a vibrant downtown. I mean, those aren't mutually exclusive. You know, I think this is what Pastor Dennison has been saying right along. But he and his congregation, it seems to me, got really pretty annoyed with being treated in a kind of a cavalier way. There's opportunity to correct all that, and I hope that will happen. The second thing I wanted to bring up is a learning I got this evening, and I want to pass it on. It seems to me that it might be a good idea, just now speaking as an individual, not as a city commissioner. I'm saying it now because I have a microphone and I have people in the audience who could hear it. But just as an individual, I think it might be good in future thinking of starting historic districts is to have a public meeting organized by the Historic Preservation Commission to just ask the question of the property owners involved, should a study be undertaken? So it's right at the very beginning, you get some clarity. Everybody gets involved. Is this study going to, should this study go ahead? We'll learn some historic facts, and we'll know that much. And when, should we even begin with that step? Well, we may well say yes, you know. But at least there's not going to be that problem of somebody going ahead and preparing reams, you know, pages and pages of detailed historic information without ever having consulted the property owners. That's where the thing went wrong. I think by changing procedures, not changing ordinances or anything, but just changing procedures within the Historic District Commission, we can prevent something like this from happening again. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Cunningham?
All right, so I'm sorry, but I might have a few minutes, I might have, be a little long-winded today. First of all, there was an individual who lost his life to gun violence on a national level by the name of Mr. Nipsey Hussle. And he had a major impact across the United States in a positive way. And so rest in power to that king. But it also makes me think about, and today I had the honor of attending a funeral of one of our city citizens by the name of Patty Rowe. She has been a neighbor of my parents for over 30 years. She is one of my other moms. She is an individual who, her and her husband have been individuals who I have often ate at their dinner table. I have often went by to ask for sugar because it's the holidays and the stores are closed and things of that nature. And she passed away from cancer, life taken too soon. And I say that to, say one, you don't have to have a national platform to do right. And you never know the individuals that you may have an impact on without her being a cornerstone of not only me in my life, but a cornerstone on my street, Southworth Terrace, a cornerstone in my community of the East Side, a cornerstone for the city of Kalamazoo, a cornerstone for the county of Kalamazoo. I do not know how many lives would not be where they are today without someone who has been so passionate, so loving in this community. And so I honor her for the little things that she has done consistently in the life that I know. And I know Mama Gigi may remember Miss Patty Rowe also, as she was also at one time a Southworth resident. But I also say that to say, make sure that you're loving on those closest to you and those that are around you. If you have a husband, get him a candy bar on the way home if that's what he likes. If you have a wife, it's the simple things. Go and buy a flower. Take that moment just to show a little bit of extra love. Having lost her, Miss Patty Rowe, made me really realize that I need to spend more time with my family and with my mother and my father, because time isn't guaranteed to us. Now that moves into KCAN. So earlier in this meeting, we had the opportunity to recognize Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month, which is the month of April. And we want to make sure that we're intentionally being proactive. I am a champion in this space because I know what it's like to go to bed at night and fear for your life, or to feel lost or feel abandoned or to be hungry or things of that nature. And to be helpless at such a young age, you either don't have the power to communicate what it is that you have going on, or you don't have somebody to advocate for you, and things often may get overlooked. And so for KCAN and what it presents to me, the ability to be proactive versus reactive, the ability to educate and empower a young individual means the world to me, because I personally have experienced situations similar. So I ask that if you are also an individual who would love to engage in that capacity, I have a couple opportunities. One, we can't do this work without the ability to have funds. And so we often take this month as an opportunity to fundraise. But one thing that's near and dear to me is, I believe in a Father, a Heavenly Father, who sits high and looks low. And so at the end of this month, we have what we call Blue Sunday, and it's a national day to recognize and pray for victims of child abuse and neglect. We wear blue and encourage pastors to prayerfully consider taking a special collection on that day to benefit KCAN. Also, that would be 4/28 of this month. Also, 4/26 to 4/28, we have what we call our Be a Lifesaver campaign. And that gives you the opportunity to help us fundraise. And if you would like to be a part of that, just go to kalamazoocan.org. Once again, that's kalamazoocan.org. Also, if you would like more resources, including a special prayer for abused and neglected children, please reach out to us and we will make sure that we are accommodating. And what is next that I wanted to bring up? Last but not least, I would like to wish my friend, my mentor, my colleague, and probably I'm a little biased to say he is my favorite mayor in the history of Kalamazoo, Mayor Bobby J. Hopewell. I would love to wish you a happy birthday and many more.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I think in light of what's happened tonight, I don't have the right words, but I do want to say to Sharon Ferraro, who's still in the audience tonight, that we've known each other for a couple of decades, and I know that this has been a really difficult evening for you, and I just need to lift up publicly your dedicated service to historic preservation, your wisdom and expertise. I've seen you in different boards and in different functions throughout this community for years, and you go above and beyond the call of duty, helping property owners kind of navigate the historical requirements in their properties. And while I know this was a difficult night for you, I needed to lift up and let you know just how much I value you as a public servant for Kalamazoo, as well as a neighbor and a friend. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just real quick, I dislike when we're at each other so much, but then I also think that this is how community works. Sometimes it's wrestling, sometimes it's muddy and dirty, and if we were the exact same, you know, everything would be the exact same. I still prefer that we have had more engagement, but I don't get to win every day, and nobody else does. Though I'm sad, in this case, that we can't move forward in a different way, maybe landing at the same decision that was made, maybe not, I don't know, but I do believe we missed an opportunity. My last two things are, Commissioners, I am excited that at the next meeting, we'll be bringing the Northside Cultural Business District Authority members to you to hopefully approve. Worked on that with Ms. Maddie Jordan Woods today. We've worked beforehand and started narrowing down people, and we think we're going to have a dynamic crew to appoint to this authority. Looking forward to that. And then I want to wish a belated birthday wish to the great Commissioner Cooney on his 52nd birthday. So, you know, we are joking.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. Mayor. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Noonan, I think I saw you yesterday. You might have a headlight out. A red SUV sort of. It's been coming and going. Oh, okay. I was sort of pulling out. I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure.